Grand Theft Auto San Andreas is still to this day one of the greatest games ever made. Some may not be able to appreciate the game because it does seem somewhat quaint in a lot of ways ever since technology has allowed us to make grander, more technologically advanced games, but for me, I believe that Grand Theft Auto San Andreas for its time came together with such a lightning-in-a-bottle combination of factors that makes it even to this day something that is truly undisputedly classic. It was for a very long time my favorite game, and it still might be, but these days I don't tend to put too much stock in the idea of categorizing my favorite games because once you get up to a certain level, the level of fondness and quality is so close that there's barely anything to separate them, so I don't try to separate them. And as obvious as it may seem in hindsight, for a while I wasn't sure what to do for my year-end video. Last year I covered possibly the most important trilogy of games in my life, and it wasn't until I got a bit drunk a couple of months ago and I suddenly had the urge to play this game that I realized how obvious the obvious was. Because I've covered different aspects of Grand Theft Auto San Andreas many times, ranking the missions, discussing the cheats, making a couple of character profiles, Bigfoot, and so on. But never have I broken down and analyzed exactly why this game means so much to me. So strap in, this is going to be a long one, because there is a lot to say. First and foremost is my decision for why the footage you're looking at looks the way it does. In the past, I've used more recent versions of the game with upscaled textures and resolutions, but as you're seeing here, the game footage is in 480p and an aspect ratio of 4:3. Well, here's the thing, my lovelies. Normally I like to provide the optimal visual experience for my audience, which usually means upscaling the resolution, applying various patches, and if possible, playing the most up-to-date version that isn't a straight-up remaster. But in this case, I wanted to play Grand Theft Auto San Andreas as I remembered it, which means standard definition, 4:3 aspect ratio, no patches to remove the color filters. This is as authentic as I can get right now without plugging in my PS2 because none of my capture cards are able to capture footage that low res anymore. Though I will still be applying a 60 FPS patch because there are some lines I will never uncross. So this is Grand Theft Auto San Andreas as I remember it. It was only during Christmas of 2007 that I got my PS2. I know some people may laugh at that fact given that the PS3 was already out by that point, but my family was, shall we say, financially challenged, so we were always behind the curve in these cases. I would have been 11, I believe, and while games like Crash Nitro Kart and Tomb Raider Legend definitely blew my mind at this specific time, I wasn't ready for the main event. It was, I want to say, April of 2008 when my sister brought home this strange game. I was only vaguely familiar with the Grand Theft Auto series at this point, particularly its reputation. I remember getting read the Riot Act one time about what you could do, how you could kill hookers and then kill their family, which was just media hyperbole at the time. You could kill hookers, but not their families. So I wasn't sure what to expect, and I watched her play the game for a while, and it was a revelation. It was like the holy grail of gaming for me because I had never in my life seen a game with as much anarchic freedom as this game had. I remember watching her play and constantly asking questions if you could do this or that, because I was curious to see what the developers had thought of. I couldn't believe what I was seeing, and then she said those magical words. By the way, if you're ever at home while I'm at work, feel free to play the game.
Never in my life have I needed something so much and never known until I received it.
And that was all I needed to hear. Thus began a whirlwind love affair that lasted years of my life. Well, actually, it wasn't that simple at first. At first, I just decided to mess around in the world, do rampages, explore, do more rampages, play around with cheat codes, more rampages. It was during these initial days of play where I found myself discovering a lot of things that I wouldn't have context for until a while later. Like, what was this atrium? What was this random motel? What was the purpose of this betting shop? There's something about those initial few times I played the game that left such an impression on me. Something about the gameplay combined with the atmosphere of the game left me feeling a certain magical feeling that can only be compared to waking up on Christmas morning as a kid. Even still, aimlessly messing around got old after a while, so I decided to do my own playthrough of the story mode, skipping cutscenes because I was playing the game on mute so my parents didn't hear because God help me if they ever found out. Unfortunately, I liked to play around with the cheats, and I found out all too late that if you activate the pedestrian riot cheat at any point, even if you deactivate it, it causes a specific glitch in NPC behavior that you can't undo, which will cause the Mad Dog mission to be unwinnable, which is unfortunately a necessary mission. I was devastated, and I went on to try the game again after a couple days of resentment. This time, decidedly cheating less. I got past the Mad Dog mission, but unfortunately a particular mission late into the game wouldn't activate, rendering my game unwinnable. A character was supposed to call me, and they never did. Why? At this point, I had no idea. Once again, I was devastated, and this time it took me a few months before I got over the pain to give this a third try. This time I decided to play through the game without cheating at all. And the same thing happened. Though it might have been that I wasn't patient enough to wait for the phone call to activate the mission. I may have waited 20 seconds, I may have waited 5 minutes, but either way it lasted longer than my patience, and this time I was beyond devastated because I wanted to love this game so much, but it kept kicking me in the balls. I was an obsessive child. At this point, it took me a year and a half before I would try the game again, but even then, during this time I would still talk about the game among my peers, talking about the cool missions and all the things you can do. Despite everything, I was jilted but still a fan. And then late 2010 came. I was freshly in high school in a new city and needed something to occupy my time with. I thought to myself that I would give it one more shot because I played every other game I owned to death. I was apprehensive but determined. It helps that my brother had just given me his PS2, so the change in hardware may have fixed whatever issue was preventing the game from being finished. Once again, no cheats, just pure determination, and after fighting through the game, I got to the point where that elusive phone call should have happened. I held my breath, and I got the call. Sure enough, I was able to get past that roadblock. I wasn't ready to tempt fate just yet though, so I continued holding my breath for every phone call until I passed the requirements to get to the final mission, and finally got through it. The 2.5-year grudge had finally been settled, my longest grudge I held against a game until it was overtaken by my asinine grudge I had against Dawn of the Dragon for a while. But I wasn't satisfied. The game had really tested me and I wanted to teach it a lesson for all the time it wasted, and to be honest, I also just didn't want the adventure to end. So with a handful of Halloween candy in my mouth, I leapt into the game to 100% it, and I spent the next month going through every single required task in order to 100% the game. I printed out sheets of collectibles which have unfortunately been lost to time. I would cross each one off as I found them. I read webpage after webpage about where to find certain cars to do the import-export side quest. I memorized certain cheats so thoroughly that they're practically burnt into my retinas, and then the day finally came. November 8th, 2010. The day I finally settled the grudge. I sprayed over that last tag near the Los Santos airport and I drove back to Grove Street to watch the sun rise on a new day. And then I ate the full-size coffee crisp I got on Halloween that I'd been saving for that particular moment, and it was the sweetest coffee crisp I ever tasted. And it didn't stop there. I continued to mine the game for whatever content it had left. I looked into non-mandatory content, I looked into Easter eggs, I looked into things that the developers had no intention of us ever seeing, like the mysterious reverse world where dwelleth the cutscene environments. I discovered things that nobody had ever seen before, like a hollow roof in the army base, or a way to exceed the height limits without mods. All of this led to one of my first YouTube videos in March of 2011. One that I consider lost media because only I have access to it, but long story short, if you ever wondered how I got my start in gaming content creation, you have GTA San Andreas to thank for that. It's been a long journey getting here, from excitement to pain to favorite game of all time, and now it's time to give the devil its long-awaited due. Okay, just so we're clear, I won't be playing the main theme because while 99% of the time there hasn't been an issue, I did once get manually copyright claimed by the composer himself, and I don't want to risk that again. And buddy, if you're watching, I'd rather mute a few seconds of audio than pay you half my ad revenue, so keep that in mind for the future. So what is it that makes this game as special as it is? Well, honestly, it's a bit of everything. Of the main trilogy of games on PS2, this was the culmination of everything that they had done. GTA 3 was groundbreaking but fairly basic in the grandness of time. Vice City was more experimental and innovative, but still a fairly small focused game. San Andreas, meanwhile, endeavors to take everything that the previous two games did and pump it full of steroids. Unlike the previous two games, which despite their differences, have a somewhat indistinguishable game engine right down to the way characters moved, as well as the smoke trails left behind by bullets on account of only coming out a year apart, they took an extra year for this one, and the extra year allowed them to update the renderware engine quite heavily, making it feel extremely distinct. You could fool yourself into thinking that it could be from a completely different series altogether at times. Plus, if they were entirely capable of bringing out a new game yearly, they really did put that extra year to good use, making what was at one point one of the biggest and most ambitious games ever. And you may not get that impression as you're starting out. You don't really get to appreciate the lengths that they really went to make this game what it was until a few chapters in, because it starts out very small and very local. There's a prequel movie called The Introduction that shows you the events leading up to the game, though there are some spoilers, so you're probably not advised to watch it until at least the first major plot twist. You'll know the one. And I'll be spoiling it in a second, so if you somehow still haven't played the game, this is probably your last chance to do so before getting everything spoiled. With that said, this introduction also gives you an insight into the characters and shows you certain things that were only referred to in the game, particularly the murder of Officer Pendlebury, which is sort of the inciting incident to the entire game. That said, everybody has probably already seen the game's intro because it's been memed to death. After the death of his brother Brian, CJ, Carl Johnson, second in command of the Grove Street family's gang, left Los Santos to start a new life in Liberty City, respectively this universe's equivalent of Los Angeles and New York City. But after his mother Beverly is killed in a drive-by shooting 5 years later, he returns home to bury her, but on his way home from the airport, he finds himself stopped and arrested by an old enemy, Officer Tenpenny, voiced by none other than Samuel L. Jackson, who voiced the character just subtly enough that I didn't actually know it was him for the longest time, because I'm so used to Sam Jackson being on all the time.
Welcome home, Carl. Glad to be back. You haven't forgotten about us, have you, boy?
Hell no, Officer Tenpenny. I was just wondering what took y'all so long.
Second to him are his lackeys, Officer Pulaski and Officer Hernandez. They arrest CJ under suspicion of killing the aforementioned Officer Pendlebury, but really they're just framing him for their own murder so they can use CJ to do their dirty work. Then they throw you out of the car and...
Oh shit, here we go again.
Anybody ever notice that the memes that catch on from games always seem to happen within the first 10 minutes of the game starting?
Ah, mierda. Aquí vamos de nuevo.
From this point forward, you're essentially under the thumb of this trio of police officers called Crash, otherwise known as Community Resources Against Street Hoodlums. The fact that this trio of corrupt cops are antagonizing you and all your homies is kind of the main overarching plot that everything stems from, even if much of the plot after a certain point doesn't involve them and only has them as a distant secondary threat that calls upon you every now and again when they need you to do something for them, lest they turn in the evidence that implicates you in murder. The way I describe the story of GTA San Andreas is 100 micro-stories that build into the larger story, but at first it starts out fairly tightly focused on one thing, which is about the different things that you will do to help your homies and your community survive and thrive against insurmountable odds. What I would describe as Chapter 1, everything up to the mission The Green Saber, every mission string has an overarching mini-story of what each character is doing to help, or in one case, sabotage the gang. It's no secret that this game is based heavily on the very real urban gang life of South Central LA of the 80s and 90s. They even have Grove Street located in an area called Ganton, which is a take on Compton, and nearby there's a place called Idlewood, which is a take on Inglewood. I obviously didn't grow up in South Central LA during the height of this gang violence, the same can be said for most people. Like most people, my point of reference is mostly based on media adaptation, movies like Boys in the Hood, or obviously there's various rappers like Ice Cube, Eazy-E, Dr. Dre, etc. who originated from the Compton area who would recount gang life in their lyrics, but obviously as much as the media and even the people who were in there might recount life in that world, outside of sparse news footage and witness testimony, it's hard to know how much of it is real and how much of it is media hyperbole. With that said, as far as portrayal of early 90s gang life in South Central LA that you often see in the media, this story is very authentic to that style of story. As a matter of fact, the more familiar you are with the culture, the more you'll get out of this game.
So, what kind of guns we working with now?
One time came through, raided the spot.
We ain't got shit now.
Well, what you gonna do if the ballers roll through? Throw shoes at them?
Like, I was mentioning this game to a friend of mine who had never played the game, but is so in tune with the culture that he was able to bring up things about this game that even I didn't know, because there are apparently some things about this game that are so well known among people familiar with the culture that you don't even need to have played the game, such as Ryder's design being based on Eazy-E. I'm personally not familiar with the culture this game invokes, so I'll be the first to admit that as much as I love this game, there is quite a bit about it that does go over my head. The first third of this game is a tense and at times uncomfortable look at gang life during the 90s cocaine epidemic. That's the most confrontational part of the entire story in my opinion, is the fact that they don't shy away from the real nitty-gritty of why these communities were suffering back then. At any given point when the story is focused on Los Santos, there's a good chance that slinging yayo is a topic that comes up quite often. And a large portion of that is because of Big Smoke, who's the only one in your main central crew who's doing everything he can to sabotage CJ and the gang in a subtle enough way not to be noticed. It's one of those things where the signs are all there if you know where to look, like how in the mission drive-thru, he's the only one not shooting at the ballers. He keeps his hands busy in a plausibly deniable way by eating all the food.
I'll shoot him when I'm done eating.
Quit stuffing your motherfucking mouth.
Man, what's your problem? I ain't stuffing, homie. I'm enjoying my meal.
But the point is that he's not being antagonistic towards the ballers here, and then his missions have nothing to do with the Grove. Often his missions are seemingly completely random, but they all follow one central theme: having you fight different gangs that are based out of different parts of San Andreas. He usually comes up with some excuse, like with the gang of Russians, he claims that as soon as the Berlin Wall fell, one of his cousins was killed by Russian gang members. But that's likely just some BS that he claims. Wait, BS? Big Smoke? I just got that. His real reasons are interpretive, but could be one of two things, or possibly a combination. Sending CJ on wildly dangerous missions in the hopes of getting him killed because CJ is good at what he does and had already begun the process of rebuilding Grove Street when Grove Street becoming powerful works against Smoke and his interests. Second of all, having you deal with the competition, fighting against other gangs that are pushing drugs in San Andreas, because the less competition, the better. You see, the big first act twist in this game is that Big Smoke had secretly teamed up with Officer Tenpenny and the Grove Street family's most bitter rivals, the Ballas, to create his own drug empire. In a very short space of time, he becomes one of the richest and most influential people in Los Santos right under your nose. In fact, once everything goes down, he's even occasionally on WCTR, or West Coast Talk Radio, discussing how much of a philanthropist he is.
This is well-known philanthropist Big Smoke, and you're listening to WCTR. Make a difference to your community. Keep our cities drug-free. Look, I'm doing my bit. How are you helping?
He's kind of an Al Capone-style leader, somebody who craves the spotlight and pretends to be a good guy while secretly being behind so many atrocities behind the scenes. This is the big spoiler in the bonus movie that Big Smoke tried to convince gang leader and brother to CJ who goes by Sweet to get in on the drug trade because it's making everyone else but them rich. However, Sweet doesn't budge.
This is the biggest money-making opportunity that guys like us will ever see.
I got all the shit I need. Man, I thought we was in this for the hood. Not destroying the family, man.
So Smoke and Ryder have to make the tough decision to betray their own gang for their own benefit. Hence, a plot was made to get Sweet out of the way. In a car identified as a green Sabre, some Ballas drove into Grove Street in the dead of night to attempt to kill Sweet. But they accidentally killed Beverly Johnson, his mother, instead. The inciting incident that got CJ back into Los Santos. That's the ultimate betrayal of everything, that your own homies would choose money over their own. But quite frankly, I think there is a bit of moral ambiguity with Smoke's mentality, because he's lived in the ghetto for his entire life. He never had an opportunity to be anything but what he currently is. And if every other gang around him is going to get rich off the drug trade, why shouldn't he have the option to get in on the action? Especially since the saturation of street drugs is so high that whether he sells or not, they're gonna be there anyway. Aspirations are good to have, but in his case, it's aspirations unchecked, which has caused him to betray the people in his life who aren't just friends, they're his brothers. He's so attracted by the prospect of money and influence beyond his wildest dreams that he's willing and eager to kill his own, and even when a sweet old lady gets killed in the crossfire, he doesn't care. He doesn't show any remorse. It's all part of the game, but the reason why there is some moral ambiguity is because everything was falling apart at the seams. You see, in the 5 years since CJ left, Sweet kinda drove the gang into the ground. To someone like Sweet, it's easy to see that it had to do with the aforementioned unwillingness to budge on the topic of selling hard drugs, but it's not entirely that simple, since CJ is able to restore the gang without slinging, but there's no doubt that the success of the other neighborhood gangs has to do with drugs. For example, it's implied that the money that the other gangs have been getting from pushing has allowed them to upgrade their arsenals, meaning that they've been able to systematically bump off many high-ranking members of the Grove Street families over the previous few years. And those who aren't dead have gone turncoat over the prospect of personal gain. Even the portions of the gang that haven't gone turncoat are feuding with each other, hence the mission where you have to save Sweet from the Seville Boulevard portion of the gang. So as the world is burning around him, all Sweet can do is brag about sticking to his principles. Whether this was intentional or not, it's clear to anybody who has one functioning eye that Sweet is an extremely ineffective leader. He's sat idly by while everything has gone to hell, and as a matter of fact, while he's naming all his friends who have died, he isn't even aware that he's lucky not to be among their ranks. At this point, the only high-ranking member of the gang who has any faith left in Sweet whatsoever is CJ. Everyone else is either a grunt or is secretly undermining him. They've already given up. Without CJ, the gang was on the fast track to destruction within a couple of weeks. So that's the big nuanced question with this game. Big Smoke could see the writing on the wall just as much as anybody. So was he truly wrong for having an escape plan? I don't think he was wrong in that sense. It was simply the way he went about it. It was his eagerness and his willingness to go as far as he did. But I think the fact that he is one of those villains who, despite their actions, you can kinda see their point, was intentional. Because there's no mistaking the fact that Big Smoke and CJ are two sides of the same coin by the end of the game. The entire second act of the game, the portion of the game between the two Los Santos chapters, is about CJ doing essentially what Big Smoke did, just in a more legitimate way. Playing the cards he's dealt to make something more out of himself than the gang life could offer. Because I think the point of the two parallel stories is that ambition and wanting something better for yourself are not bad intentions to have, but when it goes unchecked, it can lead to a lot of dangerous consequences. Meanwhile, stagnation and complacency can be just as dangerous, hence Sweet's entire story. Ultimately, Smoke's willingness to do whatever it took is what backfired on him, but it obviously positively affects him in the short term. Of course, the odd one out in Smoke's story and the story as a whole is Ryder.
Damn dope fiends and drug addicts everywhere in the city. Piss me off.
A lie detector determined that was a lie.
Playing this game for the first time, seeing that he's in on the betrayal is tragic at first until you think about it, and it honestly becomes confusing. Everything he does is to benefit the Grove Street, and all his missions directly benefit Grove Street. His whole mission string is about upgrading the gang's arsenal by any means necessary, up to and including robbing the National Guard. That ain't grunt work. So if anything, him betraying the gang is entirely counterintuitive based on his actions, and yet he's right there alongside Big Smoke betraying you. Plus, it's also worth mentioning that in the cutscene where you see the betrayal, CJ never acknowledges Ryder. He only acknowledges Smoke.
Oh, no. Shit, Smoke, what you into?
Apparently all of this is because the voice actor for Ryder had a dispute with Rockstar Games mid-development, which caused them to hastily write him out of the story. For a while, I did question the legitimacy of this claim. After the opening chapter, he never says anything that isn't a stock and/or repeated line.
Can't stop me.
He's in it for those boats!
But my point of confusion was the fact that he appeared in the introduction, which was made after the fact. Though I thought about it and realized that the 3 lines that he has in this mini-movie might have been unused lines, and they decided to structure Big Smoke's dialogue around that.
I need to be in charge of my destiny, homie. Cool. How my shit look, fool? It's gonna take more than a bullet in the head to stop me.
So I guess it does pass the sniff test that he left early, and the sad thing is it doesn't actually affect the story all that much, because he was the least important of the main crew, so you could cut him out without affecting the story that much. But I wish there was a way they could have done this while also keeping his characterization consistent. And there's an easy way to have done this, I think. In the mission The Green Saber, you could have had Ryder as part of the gang fight at the end. What if Ryder were to have been killed in the fight where Sweet got gravely injured? That way you write him out of the story, you build into the tragedy of Smoke's betrayal by having it negatively affect your established crew, and you make Ryder's death actually mean something, rather than being a mid-game death that ended up being slightly anticlimactic. Either way, earlier I mentioned that Tenpenny was involved in Big Smoke's drug operation, but what is his overall purpose in that? Well, it's pretty simple. Tenpenny and the rest of Crash are a specific unit of the police with the sole purpose of dealing with gang-related crime. But of course, Tenpenny along with his sidekick Pulaski are about as corrupt as it gets. And they're using the relatively unobstructed access to the Los Santos gang scene to make themselves richer. At first, their stated intention was to make sure that no gang gets too powerful, because by keeping things at a consistent, even playing field with tons of conflict, he could control all the gangs, because if one gang ever became too powerful or wiped out the other gangs, then he couldn't control them. Kind of a genius balancing act when you think about it. By doing this, he's able to use the threat of total collapse through strategic gang warfare to keep people in line. And not only that, but he also keeps tabs on everyone and knows what everyone is doing at all times. That way, if the threat of gang warfare isn't enough, he can have them arrested at any time. So their continued existence is only allowed if it's profitable to him. The stated intention here is to use the balance of power to allow himself to extort all the gangs for whatever they have. Money, booze, and drugs. I'd imagine since the Grove isn't slinging, it's causing a bit of a hit to his profits in the sense that he's not getting a cut of the hypothetical drug money from their region. But that all changes when he strikes a deal with the Ballas and the Vagos at the expense of Grove Street and the other gang in Los Santos, Varios Los Aztecas. From that point forward, he allows Smoke's empire to basically run free as long as he gets a cut of the action, keeping them protected from the law while he pretends to upkeep the law and order in these gang-infested streets. Kinda reminds me of Leland Yee, a Californian senator and vocal proponent of gun control who was also involved in a black market firearms ring. But then again, people in power being secretly corrupt is a tale as old as time. Now, it's unclear what the exact sequence of events here were, because at first, Tenpenny is talking about how that fat f*** better do what he's told.
You about to wake up with your head 50 feet away from your body, son. Do what we agreed. Oh, you think you can put one over on me? Do you? I don't think so.
Probably in reference to taking out Sweet and kicking the drug business into high gear. But it seems like Smoke was already wanting to do this, and in fact was already in the drug business, given that, he was able to buy a new house. So how much of this was Smoke acting in his own volition, and how much of it was an appeasement towards Tenpenny? It's hard to know, and you may question how someone like Tenpenny would manage to stay in power. Well, that's where CJ and the investigation into Officer Pendlebury comes in. You see, Pendlebury was a cop at the LSPD who uncovered evidence of the corruption within Crash, and before he could testify to internal affairs, he was taken out by Tenpenny and Pulaski. And this is where Officer Hernandez comes in. He's the baby of the crew, having just been promoted. He shows himself to be an uncorrupted cop in the introduction, and even expresses how difficult it is to make decisions at times.
Alright, so what do? I could take this guy in, and leave a little kid with a drug addict mother, or I let a guy off with beating up his wife. I mean, it's difficult out there.
But obviously, the other two aren't having it, and need him to be on board with what they see as making the truly tough decisions for the greater good, and as an initiation, they force him to shoot Officer Pendlebury dead. And obviously, they threaten to pin it on CJ, and that's just the first cover-up. Throughout the game, you find yourself having to sabotage or even kill multiple people just to protect Tenpenny and his crew from being outed. My favorite part is probably the Mission 555 Wii Tip. From a story perspective, the mission is kind of terrible. It starts off with Tenpenny having to convince CJ, who has an anti-snitching principle, to set this guy up and then call the Wii Tip hotline.
I don't give a fuck if he kills you, me, my brother. Street cats don't call no cops.
Carl, he's a DA.
Oh, yeah? Well, where I go find him?
And then the climax of this mission is this.
Shut up! You find anything back there?
Found anything? He's got half of Mexico in here.
That's the funny thing about Crash, is that while Smoke, with a little reworking, could be considered a justified antihero, Crash is completely irredeemable. They are the worst of the absolute worst, the type of people you wouldn't even piss on if they were on fire. Hence why Tenpenny ends up being the main antagonist in the end, and not Smoke. While most characters in this game have a degree of nuance, Crash is an easily detestable group of villains with absolutely no redeeming qualities outside of Hernandez, who's barely even there most of the time. It kind of brings up that argument about whether or not villains should be nuanced or simply detestable. I think both can work and have their places, but in this case I do enjoy the fact that Tenpenny and Pulaski have no nuance whatsoever. They're evil in a very simple way. Even in their final moments, Pulaski makes a comment about banging CJ's sister.
Any last requests?
Yeah.
Can I fuck your sister? You an asshole to the end.
And Tenpenny? Well, I'll save that for the end, but let's just say he starts believing his own hype. As a matter of fact, Tenpenny's crew does bring up an interesting, albeit uncomfortable discussion. The fact that the main antagonist is a cop is sort of a given in this scenario, but I also think it was a good creative decision to make the main cop antagonist black, but also give him two subordinates, one white, one Hispanic. Why? Because diversifying the crew of villains allowed them to more centrally focus on the specific theming they were aiming for without it getting bogged down in an uncomfortable place. Now obviously this game is inherently political in certain unavoidable ways. I mean, they include this universe's equivalent of the Rodney King riots, and this game has underlying themes of police corruption and brutality, the desperation of poverty, and the African-American cocaine epidemic of the 80s and 90s. But if they were to have made the main antagonist a white guy, especially a white cop, it would have undermined the game's deeper themes because whether they intended it to or not, it would have turned the story into a relatively shallow race war when the story isn't about that. It's about how the entire system is broken, and these people are the victims attempting to thrive in a system rigged against them. The fact this game is largely set in South Central LA and the epidemic did disproportionately target the black communities was something they were never going to get away from without the game feeling inauthentic, but this decision allows them to tell the story from a more broad societal point of view, where in this situation it's not necessarily about ethnicity, it's about the powerful versus the powerless. The system being broken is the most pertinent part. I'm not sure if this is deliberate or not, but you can kill drug dealers in this game, but they always respawn. So it's like no matter how many pushers you kill, you're never gonna get rid of all of them. It's almost like it's the entire system that's creating these people and they're not some finite enemy you can kill. The funny thing is though, Officer Hernandez is shown to be a reluctant member from the beginning. Not just in the introduction, but throughout the game. In fact, he only speaks once in the entire game, in a phone call with you at the beginning, and the rest of the time he's just sitting there quietly while the other two are giving out the orders. That will come back later. So that's where everything starts, a miasma of relationships, betrayals, gang conflicts, corruption, and a never-ending fight for survival. I think what really benefits this game at this point is the aforementioned legitimacy in writing because the script feels very authentic to how at least the media portrays the subculture, which makes it doubly funny that this game was written by a bunch of Scottish dudes, and you don't even notice except for the few times where certain UK turns of phrase slip in, like calling underwear drawers.
Then them some pretty strong drawers.
Or saying Willy instead of Dick.
Hey, look. You going to the barrio with that Big Willie bullshit, and you gonna get shredded.
That sounds unnatural coming out of CJ's mouth, but everything else is authentic. Then again, nobody is more fascinated by early 90s gang culture than giant nerds. And I guess, you know, who was making games in the early 2000s? Still, it's just impressive how everything feels so painfully real. CJ is of course our main surrogate through which we view the story. Of course, being the protagonist in a GTA game, he does find himself doing a lot of ridiculously dangerous things without a second thought, but that's one of those things you kinda just have to accept with this series. Much like the rest of the game, respect is a very central theme surrounding CJ's character. Despite being brought up in the most harsh of gang environments, he's still not conditioned to view the world in terms of us versus them. He's almost always willing to give anybody a chance, if they respect him, because he judges people based on their actions and not their team, so to speak. He respects those who respect him and his family, most notably Caesar, who is the boyfriend of CJ's sister Kendall. He's from the aforementioned Varios Los Aztecas, not a rival gang necessarily, but a different gang operating out of the south side of Los Santos. Despite being initially hesitant, CJ is willing to give Caesar a chance, and Caesar ends up being one of CJ's closest friends. Meanwhile, those who disrespect him or his family eventually get theirs. Part of that has to do with CJ being notably the most effective member of the gang. As such, he's a one-man army who simply can't be stopped once he starts. Part of his willingness to go along with everything and his drive to succeed at everything he sets out to do, no matter what the cost, is presumably built off a long-standing struggle for survival growing up, leaving him with an attitude of doing what is necessary and an attitude of failure not being an option. But at first, his attitude is also built off an overcompensation. It's no secret that when his younger brother Brian died, CJ ran away for 5 years, and he's determined to stop running and face whatever challenges come his way. He wants to make it up to his family for not being there for them. Part of that is protecting them and keeping them safe by rebuilding the gang. And he has this never-ending undercurrent of remorse in this chapter, often accepting the insults they hurl at him, and if not, he meekly pushes back in more of a give me a break sort of way. Surprisingly as well, he's not nearly as psychotic as you would expect. Despite being a guy who has a body count to rival Pamela Anderson by the end of the game, he treats what he does as more of a day job and treats it with a very calm, cool, and collected demeanor. As a means to an end, or as self-preservation, even attempting to reason with certain people, and it doesn't always make him feel good. Like how even despite knowing what Ryder had done, after CJ kills him, he still feels remorse over what he had to do. But that scene is also an example of his mentality not feeling motivated to harm people if he doesn't need to, that is unless you mess with his family. Presumably on account of having lost at least half his family already, he's the type of person who will kill you without a second thought if you mess with his kin. Like the construction workers who insult his sister, one of which, the foreman, then finds himself in a cement grave. And like I said, the dialogue also really sells the nuance and the legitimacy of his character, making him sometimes feel like a real person, and he has some classic lines.
Now first we need to see what you're made of.
What it look like I'm made of? Pudding? I appreciate your input, but please, fuck off.
What'd he say?
Loke, is he available for communication?
Who?
One last thing. You do know that I'm black, right? And not Chinese.
I'm blind, Carl, not stupid.
Now, I know you blind, man, but you gotta see this.
CJ is the quintessential bro. Everything about him stems from his core principles about respect and loyalty. He's also a very determined person and has a tragically big heart despite everything he's gone through. I'd say CJ is probably the strongest character in the game, but there are tons of side characters of varying quality, but most of them feel real, even if I don't necessarily like some of them. The worst of it is definitely Sweet, as many of you will have seen from my video about why I don't like him. But at this point in the game, I don't think he's so bad. Sweet is an ineffective leader who wants to blame everyone else but himself for the decline of his gang, and he gives the rest of the family a hard time, including being blatantly racist towards his sister's boyfriend whom he hasn't even met yet. But he's also obviously not in the right frame of mind, mourning his mother as well as all his homies who have died. So it's not necessarily that he's lashing out unprompted. He could very well just be lashing out due to a difficult situation.
Ah, thought you hang with your brother, huh?
Oh, ease up, little man. Come on, it's been difficult.
And he becomes far better by the end of the chapter, eventually being able to respect those around him far more. Of course, he still puts far too much importance on the gang over his or anybody else's well-being, but I still don't hate him by this point. Then again, the less said about him in the final chapter, the better. Meanwhile, Smoke is preachy and philosophical, but is also a hypocrite, often talking about what it said in the good book while being knee-deep in secret dealings, only for the mask to eventually come off and him to be so above it all. Not caring about all the bad things he did, he only really cared that he got his. He even treated the eventual confrontation with CJ with a grim level of inevitability. And then there's Ryder. It's unfortunate that we never got to see much of what he had to offer, because in his scenes we get a sense of him being a constantly zonked out disturber who has an appreciation for his homies, but isn't afraid to put them in their place because he also has very little chill a lot of the time. It's a shame they had to throw that away through a combination of hasty rewrites and not having enough dialogue to show him for what he would eventually become after the first chapter. So he ends up being a glorified faceless goon. But those are just the casualties of the industry. Especially back then, because Rockstar Games wasn't exactly known for treating their actors well. But aside from the big four, there are plenty of other characters in this section as well who aren't as involved, such as the aforementioned Caesar, one of the greatest men who ever lived. You're initially introduced to him after winning a lowrider competition that you initially went into in order to keep an eye on your sister. I didn't even register the fact that he comes up to introduce himself before either person knows who the other is. Dude comes up to congratulate someone who at this point is just some random outsider who won a competition, beat his own gang at their own game. Turns out, he's the gang member that your sister is dating, and after an initial bit of hostility, he's able to calmly and maturely break the tension by expressing that he loves CJ's sister, and that they should choose peaceful coexistence at the very least. After which, Caesar quickly proved himself to be an absolute homie, going far above and beyond what you would expect your sister's boyfriend to do in order to prove himself, even being the person who revealed the betrayal of Smoke and Ryder, after which he helps you get back on your feet by finding you odd jobs to make money and even helps you with various jobs that don't really concern him. just because he's that good of a guy. I've already expressed how good of a character he is in this video, but it must be said that he is more of a brother to CJ than CJ's own brother. And he shows himself to be a loving boyfriend with a code of ethics that extends to his gang itself. Much like the Grove Street families, Varios Los Aztecas are against pushing hard drugs as a means to bolster the gang, but they're able to be a successful gang through their various vehicle businesses, which once again just goes to show how useless Sweet is. And he's noble too, often putting himself in danger even when he doesn't need to. Like when everything falls apart in Los Santos and he wants to go back and sort things out, but is talked down from doing so for his own self-preservation.
I did this to take care of my woman, but now I'm gonna head straight back home and I'm gonna cap me some fucking dope dealers.
He's just an all-around good guy, despite ostensibly being a criminal. Also, he's responsible for my favorite line in the game.
Here, take mine.
Where'd you get that?
Same place I bought my pants, Holmes. This is America.
I can't say enough good about him. And also, Kendall's a pretty good character, even if she is featured less. Coming across as the only member of the family who has her head on straight, being the one who wants nothing to do with the gang, angrily rejecting even the idea of dumping Caesar to get with one of the Grove Street members. She's the first person to suggest getting into legitimate business by investing in property, and she's got a nice sassy, feisty attitude to her, which makes her dialogue fun.
And look at you. You dress like a hooker.
Oh, and I guess you two would know what a hooker look like, huh?
You say it like it's a bad thing.
Shut up, Carl.
She doesn't take crap, and in the end, she ends up being one of the key figures in each of your main businesses, including the casino, proving herself to be far more capable in such things as bookkeeping and admin than you would expect given her upbringing. She creates a normal life for herself because she's determined to do so, despite what her brother Sweet wants. Opposite to her in pretty much every way would be OG Loke.
What's happening with you, Jeffrey? Hey, man, it's OG Loke, homie. OG Loke.
He's the most intentionally annoying character in the game. He's like one of those idiot middle-class kids who idolizes gang life because they see the glamour without any of the hardship. You know the type. The people who will wear their pants really low and talk about being from the hood, despite being 12 and never missing a meal in their life. Those types. The best you can hope for them is that they grow out of it, otherwise they inevitably fall into the wrong crowd, and then one day you're checking Facebook and find out they died after slipping into a drug-induced coma. Essentially, Loke is a giant poser. He wants to be a rapper, and he dreams of being a real gangster, but nobody takes him seriously. He even committed a series of petty crimes to get himself thrown into prison briefly to boost his credibility. He has an annoying voice, an annoying cadence, and an aggressive desire to do something he's not good at. He is just awful, and he gets you to do some pretty awful things as well, up to and including sabotaging the career of an up-and-coming rapper named Mad Dog in order to boost his own profile. He doesn't have much relevancy after the opening chapter outside of a few radio broadcasts where he's being interviewed.
Me and my man Smoke, we took over. I've been gangbanging since I was 3. Ice cold killer!
Excuse me?
As well as a single mission towards the end of the game where you back him into a corner and take back Mad Dog's rhyme book, the royalties from his music he stole, and get him cut from his contract. Apparently this was based off a real-life event between Suge Knight and Vanilla Ice, and as much as you can make fun of Vanilla Ice, Suge Knight is a piece of shit. I wish I could have been able to kill Loke, but I think the story wants to illustrate that he's too pathetic to be worth killing, so he slinks off never to be seen again. Despite technically being a main character, he's easily the least consequential. I remember hearing back in the day that apparently he had some involvement in the Green Saber incident, but that was apparently me misremembering. You know, it's crazy. Everything I just spent the last however many minutes explaining, all of this quality writing, all this intricate storytelling, all this quality character work, etc., is only the first act of the game. I don't say that this is a big-ass game idly. And the story of fighting the other gangs for control of Los Santos, fighting against the drug trade, fighting against Officer Tenpenny and occasionally working for him if he chooses to extort you, and reuniting and re-establishing the dominance of the Grove Street families. Through it all, there's this mysterious tension looming over everything as if there's a hidden force attempting to sabotage you at every turn. Whether it be gangs invading your home turf, the police always seemingly knowing where you are, or Tenpenny always being one step ahead of you, and it all comes to a head when the time comes for the big first act twist. While Sweet and some gang members go off on some unspecified mission that will benefit them in some way, you get a call from Caesar who needs to show you something. He brings you to a lockup downtown where the Ballas, Smoke, Ryder, and Officer Tenpenny are moving the Green Saber. proving all in one fell swoop that Big Smokin' Ryder are 1. Working with Officer Tenpenny, 2. Working with the Ballas, and 3. Were all involved in the death of Beverly Johnson on account of them having the green saber. It's at this moment when CJ realizes that the gang fight that Sweet and the other Grove Street members are getting into wasn't a regular gang fight, but it was an ambush. A trap. This part always confused me though, because I wasn't quite sure what it was about this particular gang fight more than any other gang fight that made it a trap, and why CJ was suddenly scared about it being such. But I think I understand now. So here's how I interpret it. So they probably knew this big gang fight was gonna happen, so they were able to use their knowledge of what was about to go down to conspire with Tenpenny and the Ballas to make what Sweet thought was a routine gang fight the perfect ambush to finally get Sweet out of the picture. Which is exactly what happens. Sweet is gravely wounded, and CJ goes sicko mode, killing all the Ballas single-handedly just in time for the police to show up and arrest them both. Now, there are a few questions I do have. Did they actually intend to kill Sweet, or did they want him to be arrested instead? And were the police showing up to arrest everyone left alive Tenpenny's contribution, or was that a factor they couldn't account for because the police were eventually going to show up anyway and they were just hoping they would be dead before that? Because Crash does continue using CJ for their own personal gain, just with the added leverage of Sweet being in prison, meaning they're able to make Sweet suffer if CJ ever steps out of line. So was this all part of their plan, or is this Tenpenny making lemonade out of lemons? Or third option, did Smoke want both the Johnson brothers to be killed only for Tenpenny to go back on that particular part of the plan because he needed CJ alive? A lot of questions to be answered here, but I guess regardless of what specific plan took place here, the result is the same either way. I think the only thing that doesn't make sense about this is the fact that this mission of all missions was a trap, even though Smokin' Ryder didn't know that CJ was sitting off in the shadows watching the betrayal unfold. This just so happens to be the exact moment their plot to get Sweet out of the way is happening. All I'm saying is it's a bit of a coincidence too far for me that these two things happen almost one after another. And since this was the day of the big ambush, it was also the last possible moment CJ could have found out. This is where the second act of the game begins.
He's gonna help us with the fight against crime. Right, Carl?
Yeah, by any means necessary.
You're now forced out of Los Santos, you're plopped into the middle of nowhere, and you have to build yourself back up while doing work for Tenpenny occasionally. At first, you don't even necessarily know that Sweet is alive until he calls you a couple missions later. This entire scenario was obviously a massive twist, and one of the biggest twists in gaming back in the day. Unfortunately, we kind of knew that something was gonna happen on account of the fact that they had to allow us to explore the rest of the map at some point, and I almost wish they would have gone all the way with this, making you think the entire game is gonna take place in Los Santos. What I mean is, what if in the pause menu they didn't let you zoom out far enough to see the rest of the map until this part of the game, literally hiding the other 2/3 of the game from you, and present anywhere beyond the accessible areas, like that impassable mountain in GTA 3 where they hide that area with the opening cutscene. That would have made this an even bigger twist. Either way, we're out of Los Santos, we're out of the Grove Street gang life, even disabling the territory minigame as if the game was tricking you into thinking that whole thing was going to be the rest of the game. It would be very easy to consider this part of the game completely disconnected from the rest of the game because on the surface, it's just a series of missions that don't seem to connect to the overall narrative. Except that's not necessarily true. You see, the entire point of this portion of the game is to get back on your feet. Occasionally you have to do some work for Tenpenny, but in the meantime you need to get some money together, you need to figure out how to some way somehow get Sweet out of prison, and you need to eventually work to undermine Smoke and his drug empire, but that can wait until later. This is where the game starts to become a more traditional GTA game. You end up finding your way through a series of odd jobs with odd people as a means to gradually make your way up to a nebulous goal. At this point in the game, it's less about the main story and more about the journey and the characters, because you end up meeting a lot of fun characters and have them take you through their own sub-stories. In fact, much of this part of the story is essentially the result of Caesar, because he's the ultimate bro. It makes sense that he would be your way back into the game from a storytelling perspective, given that he's pretty much your only friend left at this point. With your gang in shambles, your brother in prison, and your homies turning on you, he was the one sane person left in your immediate circle. He's the one who introduces you to his cousin, which results in you initially getting some money, and he introduces you to the world of countryside racing, which then introduces you to Woozy Moo, a high-ranking member of the Triads who becomes a valued associate of CJ and vice versa. The chapter of the game in the countryside is fairly short and fairly nondescript, and the next major chapter is in San Fierro, where there are two major plot lines happening simultaneously, and throughout this chapter, CJ's crew and Woozie Moo's triad faction work together to solve their mutual issues. First of all, you have the Loco Syndicate, a conglomeration of gangs and pushers from throughout the state working to push their stuff onto the streets, with Ryder being there as a representative of Smoke and his empire. The key members of this crew are Jizzy, the biggest pimp and pusher in San Fierro, T-Bone Mendez, a friggin' psycho, and Mike Torino, who deserves his own discussion later. CJ sees Jizzy as the easiest means to infiltrate the gang and get information on it because he's a dim-witted businessman who's susceptible to sweet talk, but he's also a monster, literally having you kill one of his hoes for trying to get out of the game. Naturally, in keeping with the theming, Jizzy and the rest of the gang treat you like dirt, even at one point pretending like they're gonna kill you for their own amusement. Only Torino truly respects you, even if he doesn't show it just yet. Meanwhile, the other two eventually find their disrespect and their misplaced allegiances coming to a head with a bullet in the same place. I think the most interesting part about this subplot is the sharpness of the razor's edge that CJ is walking on. Smoke's gang may just be some associates operating out of a different city, but all it takes is one meeting where Ryder shows up unannounced and the whole thing comes crashing down on CJ. Though I guess if Woozie had information on the specific associates in the gang, he probably could have information on avoiding that specific circumstance. Meanwhile, at the same time, Woozie Moo and his crew are feuding with a Vietnamese gang called the Da Nang Boys, with CJ offering an outsider's perspective towards the triads, which helps them outsmart and eventually take out the Da Nang Boys. At first, Woozie just wants CJ to sit in on some triad business in order to help gain a mutual understanding of their business practices, only for things to go to hell in a handbasket, and that differing perspective is what eventually wins them the minor gang war. It's not the best story since you're viewing it from an outsider's perspective, so you have no personal investment, but it does make for some fun character interactions and missions. Hilariously as well, when you're fighting the Vietnamese gang leader in the end, the Snakehead, as he's called, challenges you to an honorable sword duel. You can absolutely just shoot him at this point, but in this case I chose to fight him with the sword, and given how long and intricate this mission is, there's a big build-up to the final duel with this minor antagonist, only for him to die literally in one swipe in my case. I busted a gut laughing. Woozie is then a vital help in eventually fighting the Loco Syndicate, offering information on key members and the easiest points of access to infiltrate the group, instructions on how to track everyone down, and eventually, when it's time to take the Syndicate out, Woozie sends some of his best men to help you out. Obviously, he's not as front and center in helping you as you are with helping him, but that's for the very understandable reason that Woozie is blind, so he's able to help you out in other ways. Yeah, that's kind of the main quirk with his character. They do treat it respectfully, but it does lead to some funny events. Like how you come to realize that anytime he wins at some point of competition, it's because his associates are rigging the game.
I'm a stick. What you got?
How would I know? You tell me.
Not good, man. You got 47.
Damn. You're bad luck for me, you know? When I play the other guys, I always win.
This also leads to one of my favorite lines in the game.
I have a confession to make. I'm blind.
No shit.
Either way, it's his help that leads to the dissolution of the Loco Syndicate, which really puts a dent in Big Smoke's empire. It's this really neat symbiotic relationship between the two born of mutual respect, and that goes back to one of the key themes of this game being respect. Because at first, Woozie, despite barely knowing you and despite your wildly different backgrounds, offers you nothing but respect, and that respect is returned in kind, leading to a very profitable relationship between the two, where they eventually grow to become friends and business partners. Woozie is honestly one of my favorite characters in the game, to the point where he deserves his own character profile video. He's the definition of a brother from another mother, and the business relationship then continues into the third or fourth chapter, depending on if you consider the countryside portion its own chapter. In this case, there's this really fun subplot which doesn't have the barest connection to the main plot outside of building your own influence. Woozie is attempting to start a casino in Las Venturas called the Four Dragons Casino, an entirely legitimate business, but unfortunately he opened a casino in Mafia territory. You see, the three main Italian Mafia mafia families of Portland and Liberty City came together in a joint venture to open a casino called Caligula's Palace, often shortened to Caligula's Casino. Those families being the Leone family, the Sindaco family, and the Forelli family. It was a gesture of goodwill between all three families in hopes of bringing them all together. But all three families are looking to stab each other in the back at the first chance. This entire subplot is basically the maximum fan service subplot because it's where a lot of characters from other games get involved. The casino is specifically made to be run by a neutral third party, which ends up being none other than that schmuck Ken Rosenberg, the lawyer from GTA Vice City that became the right-hand man of Tommy Vercetti, but between games, Ken got hooked on smack and eventually got sent to rehab, after which Tommy stopped all contact. However, since he was a known associate, he was given the job. And now he's under constant fear of one of the families killing him to try and consolidate power. But how does that affect our boys? Well, as it turns out, a triad family opening a casino in Mafia territory was a bad idea, and they're trying to sabotage him. Sabotaging machines, making fake chips, etc. Since Woozie has so much respect for you and everything you've done for him, he offers you part ownership in exchange for helping to get the place up and running. So CJ quickly gets to work, beginning with CJ putting Johnny Sindaco in a shock-induced coma to try and find out which family had been messing with the Four Dragons casino, and through sheer coincidence, CJ finds his way into the circle of influence within Caligula's Palace when the Truth, one of CJ's associates, needs you to do a favor for him and pick up some of his friends in the desert after a peyote pilgrimage. And these friends just so happen to be associates of Ken Rosenberg. One of those people happens to be Kent Paul from Vice City. But then things start to come crashing down when Ken tries to quit, but then Johnny sees CJ fresh out of the hospital and has an immediate heart attack just from seeing him again, which then kills the influence of the Sindaco family within the casino, leading to a power vacuum which is taken up by Salvatore Leone from GTA 3. But it just so happens that while CJ was in Liberty City, he actually worked with Salvatore's son Joey, so he's able to help Salvatore consolidate the power within the casino, all the while CJ is secretly a double agent working with the Triads to eventually pull a heist on Caligula's casino and get the place shut down. It's this multi-level mafia intrigue story that has nothing to do with the rest of the game, but it's so compelling, multi-layered, and quite frankly, really, really cool. This was my Sopranos growing up, even before realizing how cool it was that we got to see the continued adventures of such characters as Kent Paul, Salvatore, and even Maria. This entire segment is a super intriguing, fun story of a power struggle and various betrayals, with CJ as the tentpole in the middle of it all, who presents himself as some sort of minor figure within the story, but really he's the one with all the power. Seeing all the ways that CJ works both sides without anybody but Woozie knowing is such a compelling balancing act that almost comes crashing down multiple times. Between this and the Loco Syndicate plot, CJ really loves living on a razor's edge. And what I love is that despite having done all this work to help Kent and Ken while actively being a double agent, CJ actually ends up saving them. It's understood that once Salvatore gets rid of the rest of the competition and consolidates all the power, people like Ken are no longer required and therefore need to be put out to pasture. But CJ sees them as innocent enough as to not deserve that, and instead tells them to get out of the city while implying to Salvatore that they're dead, continuing to build into CJ's genuine moral compass and his desire to not have to harm anyone who doesn't truly deserve it. He even hires them later as part of Mad Dog's comeback, but we'll get to that. It all leads to a glorious finale and something that is canonically the final event in the game, where you pull a heist on the casino, and all that trust that Salvatore put in you was misplaced as CJ walks valiantly into the sunset with hundreds of thousands of dollars into his pocket. The message is clear. Don't mess with my friends. Even though it was the Sindaco family and not the Leone family who was messing with the Four Dragons, I actually kind of wonder if CJ were to have come clean at the end of the St. Mark's Bistro mission and actually said, "Listen, Salvatore, I just have one favor to ask you. The Four Dragons Casino is actually ran by a friend of mine. Now, some of your associates were trying to mess with his business, and all I ask is that you allow them to peacefully coexist." Would Salvatore be open to that, or would he then turn on you because how dare you be friends with Triads while you're working with me? And if CJ then said, well, Ken was a legitimate friend of mine and I did this not to be a double agent, but to genuinely help a friend, would that be enough to convince Salvatore? I don't know. All I'm saying is Salvatore definitely owed CJ, but he's also a mob boss. Either way, there are so many different characters with their own missions and objectives, such as Catalina. Yet another case of fan service. If you're at all familiar with the previous GTA games, Catalina is indeed the same Catalina from GTA 3. And you even see the beginnings of her relationship with Claude, which was essentially her revenge against CJ for allegedly not treating her right, but she's completely nuts, so it's not entirely clear what she wanted. In this case, she's a cousin of Caesar, although that's a bit odd considering the fact that she's noted as being Colombian in GTA 3, but if she's a cousin of Caesar, that makes her at least half Mexican. Oh, sorry, Colombian and Dominican, but that just makes things worse.
Boy, I really hope somebody got fired for that blunder.
It's not the deepest subplot, and outside of the fan service, pretty much only exists for you to get yourself some property in San Fierro, which will then be your base of operations that you use to take out the Loco Syndicate. The place is a dump though, barely holding itself together, and I wish I could see it gradually start to get fixed up as we go through the mission string, and gradually get the business up and running. During this time, one of your main associates is someone I already mentioned briefly, the Truth. That's what he calls himself. I don't know what his actual name is. He probably doesn't even remember. He's this older hippie guy who's probably been tripping on at least 8 different drugs since 1978. He begins as an associate for Tenpenny, basically being his dealer, but of course then Tenpenny betrays the Truth, and as such you have to burn down the Truth's weed farm and get out of there. Which then begins the San Fierro chapter. One thing you come to realize when it comes to the Truth is that he's a low-key, one of the most important characters in the game because he knows everybody. When you're getting your stuff together to start the garage, he's the one who drives you around to pick up a few of his friends. 2 of which are the employees from the boatyard in Vice City, Dwayne and Jethro. And I already mentioned his association with Kent, as well as Makar, but Makar's not really important, who end up being your in during the Caligula subplot. But the most interesting thing about the Truth as far as his involvement in the plot is that you're supposed to believe that he's actually some sort of whack job conspiracy theorist, and yet all of his conspiracy theories end up being true. Like strange vans driving around the city doing God knows what, a secret government project in a government facility in the desert that's not on any maps, some weird green goo substance that might just prove the existence of alien life. Dude is on the ball. Unfortunately, the mysterious vans driving around the city was apparently setting up a subplot that never came to pass. Which is unsurprising, considering just how much content in the game was planned but never made it in. The fact that Ryder had to get written out early into the game is the very least of it. The Truth is an appealing character that juxtaposes nicely against the more serious tone of the game. Kinda like Zero. He's a giant nerd and is the machinery expert of the crew. He's relatively involved in certain parts of the game, but he also has his own dedicated optional subplot. A subplot about this guy named Berkeley.
Oh, Berkeley.
Yes.
Who the fuck is Berkeley?
Which I keep almost accidentally referring to as Birkin, but that's just because I've been playing way too much Resident Evil recently. Berkeley is another unseen nerd who runs a competing business called Berkeley RC. He has it out for Zero because Zero won first place at a science fair that they were both competing at, and I love just how bonkers this subplot is, given the fact that it's basically just a couple of nerds duking it out. You have borderline terroristic actions, people dying, and cars blowing up. It's a bit nuts, but it's all over a science fair prize.
And they say gangbangers is petty and small-minded.
So it's this hilarious juxtaposition between tone and actions that is a nice break from the more serious aspects of the game. It's also not too goofy though, it's heightened reality, but it feels entirely plausible for one person to feel slighted for not getting a prize he feels he was owed. Berkeley is even responsible for the heist at Caligula's casino almost failing. Zero's missions are infamous, but of course that's a discussion for later. I'd say the last consequential character introduced in this part of the game is Mike Torino, the last member of the Loco Syndicate that I didn't talk about, and that's because he ends up being far more consequential. He's the only one who gets away during the Pier 69 mission, so you have to chase him down and blow up his helicopter as it's getting away. With that said, he's the only member of the Loco Syndicate whose body you never actually see, and that's for a good reason, because he was never on the helicopter. Torino was always the most mysterious member of the Loco Syndicate. The way he was introduced was with Caesar saying he didn't know what to make of the guy.
Hey, who's the gringo?
I don't like the look of that guy. This more than a few thugs pushing product. It's a serious organization.
He also shows himself to be the coldest and most calculated member of the group, and you find out why that's the case in the end. That's because Torino, much like you, was a double agent, except in his case, he works for the American government. He is an incredibly morally peculiar character, but he's honestly one of the most realistic depictions of a high-ranking CIA agent that I've seen. It's never specified which agency he's part of, but given that he's involved with various overseas governments and the Latin American drug trade, it makes too much sense for him not to be part of the CIA given their history with toppling regimes and putting in puppet governments that in some way benefit Uncle Sam. Plus, it would also make sense in this story given that it's been a long-standing rumor that the CIA was partially responsible for the cocaine epidemic in vulnerable communities back in the day. And while that had always been a rumor and nothing more, there were documented cases of the CIA turning a blind eye to certain drug cartel activities if it meant fighting back against things like communism. And that's Torino's whole thing. He's constantly going on about the difference between being the good guy and doing what needs to be done in order to further the interests of the United States. He's fighting against other rival agencies that have confused social agendas. He's fighting against anything that could harm the United States by his definition. He's like this psychotic hyper-capitalist agent who can't even step outside without the possibility of 8 separate people looking to assassinate him to further their own interest, whether it be a foreign double agent or an American turncoat. Maybe not even an American turncoat, just somebody who needs him out of the way because he's getting in the way of something their agency needs. He's such an intriguing character with so many evocative lines that paint this grander mystery about what his intentions are, and if he's really on the level.
Now yeah, it's a dirty job, but somebody's gotta do it. But if you screw this up, it causes a tinderbox situation all over Latin America and the Middle East.
One of the more interesting aspects of his character is the fact that he knows about what Tenpenny is doing and has the power to stop him, but believes that he's a pawn in the greater societal vision that Torino is looking to implement.
It's all white knights and heroes. We have to make decisions, kid.
He has a philosophy of sicking bad guys on other bad guys, and sometimes even letting the good guys die if it means something for the greater good. Of course, he's also voiced by James Woods, and whatever you want to say about James Woods, he's a very talented voice actor, especially as far as portraying a scumbag.
Man, kill government agents? Kill Schmill, come on, don't look at it that way. Will you think of it as pest control? It works for me. All right, come on, I can't stay here now, I'm too hip, I gotta go, okay? I'm out of here.
The reason he needs CJ is much like the reason a lot of people need CJ. He's an outsider who can do the dirty work that needs to be done. Torino even expresses gratitude for how effective CJ is when he tells CJ just how many people are gunning for CJ's head ever since he started working with Torino. Thankfully, CJ is too small time for anybody to bother with him. This is the final point of something that I love about the story of this game, which is the constant escalation from small-time gang drama in the streets of Compton to a multi-level intrigue involving government spies, sabotage, stealing classified technology, and blowing up enemy cargo. And it feels like a natural escalation. Things gradually build into this Ocean's 11 style ridiculousness, and it all feels like it fits. Though it does kind of raise a slight issue in that CJ manages to continuously stumble across scenarios which benefit him in the long term. He's not so much stumbling into success as much as he's stumbling into the ability to succeed. Like, just imagine how different things would have been if CJ didn't meet Woozy Moo during that race, or if he didn't happen to be introduced to the Truth and therefore all of Truth's friends. But anyways, the reason that Torino is able to make you work for him is because Torino holds the key to Sweet getting out of prison. It's almost as if Torino is the polar opposite of Tenpenny, because both of them end up using their influence over the fate of Sweet to force CJ to work for them, but where Tenpenny is a man who pretends to be good but is actually horrible, Torino is a man who makes no bones about being horrible but is actually kinda good in the end. He sees himself as the hero doing what needs to be done, and whether or not it truly is what needs to be done is something that doesn't concern us because we don't get to see the fruits of our labor. Because that's not what's important. The important thing is our family. Torino is a means to an end, and in the end we find out that despite his cold disposition and his callous attitude towards his job and all the things he gets you to do, he ultimately is a man of his word. He pulls some strings to get Sweet released from prison, and you never see him again. Unlike Donald Love in GTA 3, whose disappearance has always frustrated me, I like this plot because it goes to show us that this is just another bump in the road for Torino in his journey to achieve whatever it is he's attempting to achieve. While for CJ, this is the most significant thing that's ever happened to him. I honestly kinda wish Rockstar weren't a bunch of assholes and made a spin-off about Torino because while CJ's story is massive and sprawling, it is a mere grain of sand in the desert compared to Torino's story. We're the main characters of our own story, but we are the most inconsequential of side characters to his story. And what I love about this plot is it shows me that despite appearing to consider CJ on the level of dog crap that Torino had stepped in, he actually does have some level of respect for CJ and is a man of his word. And as I've said in the past, the ending of the Torino mission string into the final part of the game is sort of where a hard line in the sand is drawn. The middle chunk of the game is wacky GTA. Something that, while presented completely straight, was ridiculous and only got more ridiculous as it went on. Whereas immediately after the final mission with Torino, the game returns to the very grounded, very confrontational place that the opening of the game took place. Obviously it needed to because they needed to finish the story they were telling, but it is funny to me how there's a hard cutoff where things go from one style to the other. But obviously, since it's all part of the same ongoing story, it still feels relatively natural, just a bit ridiculous, but natural. Now, it should be said that leading into the final chapter is a bit unceremonious if you don't do the Caligula heist first, but that's optional and you can do it whenever. Otherwise, the chapter ends with a very novel but very run-of-the-mill mission where you have to fly to Liberty City to take out the remaining members of the Forelli family who have a stake in the casino, therefore giving Salvatore complete control. Back in the day, this was the mission that kept not activating for me, which is a shame because I remember reading about it and being very excited about being able to fly to Liberty City, but you only get to explore St. Mark's Bistro and a little bit of the surrounding area. Regardless, that's the point where you get to go back to Los Santos, which is a shame because there was a far more fitting end to the chapter immediately before this. You see, in their grand return, Crash has you find an informant with a dossier of evidence that would lead to Crash being outed for corruption. Crash needs you to get the dossier as one last favor for them, but the reason why it's one last favor is because it's implied that they're gonna kill CJ after they get the info. In the mission immediately after, CJ's instructed to dig a grave for Officer Hernandez, who's allegedly the informant who almost got them caught. Of course, it's implied that the grave is also fit for two.
Alright, that's good. That's deep enough for two.
Pulaski stays behind to make sure the job gets done, but Officer Hernandez rushes Pulaski and gets shot in the process, leading to a chase where CJ finally throws caution to the wind and decides to just kill the motherfucker.
So how's your sister? I always had a thing for her. Kingpenny and I got some great shots of her and her barrel.
That to me is a satisfying capper to the chapter, especially given how much of an abusive piece of work that Pulaski was during the game up to that point, always being Tenpenny's muscle. But no, instead you have yourself a flight to Liberty City, which is relatively inconsequential to the main plot. And then there's Mad Dog. He's the rapper you screwed over at the beginning of the game, and CJ saves him from himself, so to speak, and promises to be his manager once he gets himself cleaned up. Mad Dog sold his mansion to a drug pusher in Los Santos, and now along with the help of the Triad, you go to get yourself the mansion back. And it then becomes your new base of operations in Los Santos as you plan your final assault on Big Smoke. That was a lot to get through as far as the middle chunk of the game, but like I said, so many subplots, so many fun characters, so much working in tandem. And while a lot of it may seem disconnected from the main plot, it was all helping to build up to the final return. Finally getting the resources together to fight the power. Unfortunately, this is more or less the weakest part of the game. It almost feels like they didn't expect many people to actually get this far, because for the time it was an absurdly long game. I remember kids at the time telling me the total mission count was something like 5,000, but as it turns out, I grew up with a lot of liars. The total number is around 100, depending on what you count. But either way, they front-loaded all the effort, and as such, the final chapter feels quite rushed. It's like 10 missions long, and a lot of the subplots feel somewhat rushed to conclude. Plus, this chapter of the game also contains the final form of Sweet, who is, as I previously said, the most insufferable character in the game. Basically, CJ spends God knows how much time out of the city being bumped around from mission string to mission string, and comes out with several businesses of varying legitimacy. He's a made man, and the American dream realized. He's willing to offer all of that to Sweet as he's getting out of prison, but all Sweet cares about is the hood.
You never did get it, did you, Carl? I need to go check on things in the hood. Man, that's the problem. You always a perpetrator, running from what's real.
Now, I can and have gone over this scene in depth, but every single line is infuriating because it highlights just how backwards Sweet's mentality is, and how much CJ has grown over the course of the game. Because CJ started out at a similar level to Sweet in his attitudes, but throughout the game was able to gradually realize his potential when he chose to see the world for more than just some grubby street in the middle of a rundown neighborhood. And yet Sweet is the crab in the bucket trying to pull CJ down as he's trying to escape the bucket. I know this is a realistic depiction of a certain type of person, the type of person who takes pride in stagnation, the type of person who thinks less of people for moving on from their childhood neighborhoods to make something of themselves, because somehow living in poverty is more real. Somehow it means more. Trust me, I've had hundreds of people tell me how realistic Sweet is to this type of person, and my response to that is, it doesn't make him any less insufferable. It also doesn't help that he's presented as being in the right in a lot of cases because nobody ever pushes him on this fact. Nobody ever tells him how wrong he is. CJ has like one line where he fights back, and after that, nobody ever calls Sweet on his BS. CJ stole a military jet and blew up several boats, probably earning himself a permanent place on a government kill list just to get Sweet out of prison. And all Sweet can do is complain that CJ doesn't know what's real. You know what's real? The fact that I just saved your ass. And the question of what CJ has ever done for the Grove? Well, I don't know, other than reviving it. Besides, what has the Grove ever done for him? I'll tell you what, getting his and Sweet's mother killed. Like, Sweet doesn't realize that he's idealizing the very thing that is responsible for every bit of suffering he's ever experienced, and somehow CJ is the bad guy for not necessarily resenting that life, but is being fine with moving on? Sweet has the audacity to compare CJ to Smoke in a negative way.
That's everybody's dream to get out the hood.
Man, you sound just like Smoke right now.
Like I said, Smoke wanting more was not the issue, it was the manner in which he did it. You know what the big difference is? Smoke did it all for himself. CJ did everything for Sweet and Kendall. This goes for pretty much the rest of the game, where Sweet will constantly glorify everything he's done while downplaying everything CJ ever did, because apparently it doesn't count.
Man, when you gonna give me a break?
When you stop acting like you the man. You keep yapping on what you done did, let me tell you what I done did. When Kendall needed shoes, I went out and got the money. When Mom's needed operation, I robbed people for the bread.
Genuinely seeing the sheer disrespect that CJ gets given in this particular mission and pretty much every single interaction that he and Sweet ever had for the rest of the game, I just want CJ to leave. Tell him that if this is the life you aspire to, you can do it on your own. When he's not downplaying or outright insulting your efforts to help him, he's moping around and acting like everything is ruined while he's actively choosing this life for himself. Even if he doesn't want to permanently leave the hood, he could very well just easily drive with CJ up to Mad Dog's mansion and they can plan their next move to take back their home from there instead of having Sweet sit around in a broken house, seriously considering whether or not he should ruin his life with hard drugs. I know I've covered all this in the past, but given how many great likable characters this game has, it's infuriating to see just how insufferable Sweet is. Everything he says makes me want to punch him. I feel like if they wanted to sacrifice a bit of the quote-unquote realism to make him a bit more tolerable, I would have gone for it. Besides, I feel like he can maintain his loyalty to the Grove while making him slightly more likable. As for the rest of the story leading into the final mission, a lot of it seems rushed, like I said. You have a mission where you finally confront OG Alok, a repeat of the mission where you take Glen Park, which then leads you to getting back at one of the Grove Street defectors who hadn't appeared since the beginning of the game. One mission where you help Caesar and varios Los Aztecas take back their territory from the Vagos, and that all leads to the final confrontation where you track down Big Smoke to his crack palace, which I will save for the end. What is there to say about the story of GTA San Andreas? A lot, as it turns out. I think the only word to really summarize it would be epic. I guess you could say the story is relatively hamstrung in the sense that you can only tell the story by having a dialogue that establishes a particular task for you to do. But if that's the limitation, the game doesn't really present it as such. The entire plot of GTA San Andreas is this massive ball of intrigue where so much of the story is expressed through these single individual cutscenes, but everything builds into a larger, far grander central point. But neither the individual stories nor the overall story is sacrificed for the other. It's all extremely compelling. So you can have all these entertaining sub-stories with all these entertaining characters, and it never feels disconnected or jarring. It all feels like an extension of itself, but it presents itself in such a way that you can do so many different fun, outrageous things, and it doesn't feel out of place. The main plot is confrontational, dark, and outright uncomfortable at times, with what I would assume is a relatively true-to-life depiction of gang life, a culture which, even though I'm not super familiar with, I find incredibly absorbing. CJ as a catalyst for the story is super likable, and you really want to see him succeed more than anything. And once you spin out from that particular plot line into the rest of the plot, it's just plain fun. You're pulling heists, you're infiltrating elaborate drug operations, you're fighting a war of nerds, you're sabotaging an entire energy grid just to give you a 5-minute blackout at an opportune time. You're going through an elaborate double agent scheme to put a dent in 2 separate mafia families, only to lure the 3rd mafia family into a false sense of security before betraying them. You're becoming a government spy, sabotaging multiple agencies and even countries, all for your own personal gain. It's friggin' ridiculous, and it's awesome. Combine that with a series of incredibly fun, distinct, well-written, and well-acted characters, and you have one of my favorite overall narratives in the history of gaming. Sure, it may not be as tightly focused or consistent as some of my other favorite games, and of course the final chapter is definitely a major step down, but it doesn't take away from the fact that I could gush about the story for ages, and indeed I have. I'd be curious to see how many people clicked off this video because they were told it's going to be a review of the game, and all I've done is talk about the story for over an hour. Well, worry not, because I have quite a bit to say about the rest of the game as well. A minute ago, I described the story as epic, and I would say that's a pretty good description for the entire game generally. It was far from the biggest game of all time even at the time, but most of the biggest games ever made around this time were PC games that didn't really have an upper limit as far as their size and tech was concerned. Console games were always limited in that sense. By the time of the PS2, very few developers were willing to make a game on 2 discs. And the PS2, while a damn fine console, was also the weakest of the consoles that counted around that time. Which was fine more often than not. That was enough for developers to realize their vision. So sure, while some PC gamers may have already experienced games that felt bigger than this, to a person who primarily played console games, nothing before this had ever felt so epic. A scope so massive it almost felt true to life. Like they were really crafting an entire digital version of a US state for you to explore. Sure, there were probably games that were longer and games that had bigger worlds even on the PS2, but that's not what I mean. This is a case where the game world felt simultaneously big but also lively, with actual people walking the streets who would react to things you would do.
These perpetrating whores out here can't see me.
The world feels reactive. NPCs will be chased by the cops, for example. They even have AI subroutines like sitting outside of their house, or even parking at a specific house and pretending to walk in. Although that can lead to funny circumstances like multiple people trying to park in the same house, and also that house being mine.
Why are you here?
I don't think it's unfair to say that this was a landmark title in a lot of people's lives because of this. That did come at a cost though. The thing about this game is that it was so big that there had to be some compromises as far as how they were going to fit everything they wanted on a single disc. This is why you may notice the audio quality is a bit on the rougher side, because they had to compress a lot of the audio to get the file size down. The sound effects that guns make are low quality, and even the dialogue suffers a bit. It's also why you may notice that there's not a lot of NPC variety. Every city in the game has a grand total of maybe 10 to 15 NPC models, to the point where you will constantly see people walking alongside clones of themselves. Plus, this game doesn't exactly look the best even for its time. This was the year that Half-Life 2, Doom 3, and Halo 2 came out. Games that were far more appealing visually than this game even at max settings. So GTA San Andreas had to spread itself very thin in places to achieve what it wanted to achieve, but I feel like it spreads itself thin in all the right ways, because they're able to use that to focus the game and create absolute madness of gameplay detail and variety. That starts with the map itself. It was far from the biggest game world at the time, but it was the biggest game map in the series and had unprecedented depth. 33 square kilometers of explorable area, and most of it was functional as well. It's not like a lot of games these days where the maps are big but mostly empty. This featured 3 separate cities to go to. Los Santos, a take on Los Angeles, San Fierro, a take on San Francisco, and Las Venturas, a take on Las Vegas. And outside of those cities, you had multiple small towns and even an entire countryside to explore, but unlike GTA 5, where the countryside takes up the vast majority of the map and is almost entirely empty, the countryside here takes up maybe a third of the map and still manages to fill itself with worthwhile architecture, like an entire mountain or something like 9 isolated towns. It's no doubt that it's a bit quaint these days, and as a matter of fact, back after I 100%ed the game, I actually found myself doing random tasks to fill my time. At one point, I decided to fly from corner to corner in the fastest airplane to see how long it would take. I believe it took a grand total of about 100 seconds. But on the ground level, there's still so much you can do, and so many different areas to play around in. Part of the fun of experiencing this game for the first time is just going around and seeing what you can do. See what you can find. Like the giant storm drain channel that runs through much of Los Santos, the airplane graveyard in the desert, a couple random golf courses, and so on. And when you become familiar enough with this game, some things start to stick out to you. There's a certain surreality to this game that makes the design fun in a way that only a quirky video game world can. Like, yeah, you can take a lot of this world at face value, but sometimes if you stop and really look around, you'll find a lot of quirky architecture. This house in particular always intrigued me. It's just a circular house with a walkway coming straight from the street. How is this a functional home? Sure, there's a pseudo driveway that goes under the house that could function as a place to park, but that spot is actually so steep you can't actually drive up it with most cars. So what gives with this house? It's completely impractical and looks more like a UFO than a house. I mean, honestly, outside of Mad Dog's mansion, there's a significant chunk of houses on the Vinewood Hills that look completely impractical, whether it be dataist design or impracticalities in the functionality, like balancing entire households on a few support beams. It's an architectural nightmare. Then you have things like that random ghost town in the middle of the desert. What's the story of this place? What about all those random cabins all over the countryside? Log cabins with no doors and nothing in them. It's the most absurd, unusable type of cabin you will ever see. They almost come across more as the type of thing you would press a hidden switch in and end up in some sort of secret government facility. What about this quote-unquote carnival at the end of the Santa Maria Pier? This just looks wrong in ways that are hard to describe, but you know exactly what I'm talking about if you've actually been to a carnival. How about this giant beach that has nobody and nothing on it? Not a single NPC. It's honestly kind of eerie. How about these roads in the desert that just end? You just veer past a suburban area and they just stop. You know, back when I was like 4 or 5, I remember thinking to myself where the road ends. Like, surely the roads we drive on don't go on forever. They have to end at some point, right? For some reason I imagined that at the end of the final road there would be like a trunk full of candy or something, akin to a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. Not the weirdest thing I somehow convinced myself. I was convinced that there was one particular building in my town which was the last building ever built, because at age 3 I somehow thought that humans built every building and then just stopped. What can I say, kids are stupid. So there's a lot of weirdness to this world, which just adds to the quirky surreality of everything. It makes it fun to take in your surroundings, something that open world games are practically built for. And aside from that, it's a map with a lot of variety. Maybe not on the level of something like the Just Cause games, there's no snowy area, but you can't throw a stone in this game without hitting something interesting. Sometimes I like to go around and see what random pieces of architecture they put weird amounts of effort in, and whether or not we ever interact with them. I also like to make note of all the fun names they gave all the different shops, both the ones that are glorified boxes in the game world and have no functionality and you're not even supposed to pay them a second thought, as well as the ones that are actually interactable, like how there's a sports shop called Prolapse. That is bad, but so clever. There are a number of those in the game, like how there's a chain of vehicle customization shops called Transfender, or my personal favorite, the chicken-based fast food joint called Cluckin' Bell. Now that might fly over the heads of some of you less cultured folk, but that's a reference to Blackadder Goes Forth, the final episode of that show where Blackadder has his last hopes of being able to get out of going over the top of a World War I trench dashed, and then he says that classic line.
I think the phrase rhymes with clucking bell.
I love Blackadder. It's the best thing that Rowan Atkinson ever did, and it's a shame that he's so much more well known for Mr. Bean. And none of this takes into account the things that were put entirely in for the amusement of the developers and no one else. You can tell they had a lot of fun making this. If you go around the map, you'll find a ton of random interesting tidbits and Easter eggs. There's a place in the desert where you'll find a mass grave. There's a whole ass geyser in the middle of the desert, which I didn't stumble across for ages while playing this game.
Time to take a piss.
There's a sign in San Fierro that talks about legitimate developer information about the bridge, including its file size. It's little touches like this that you can randomly stumble across while exploring the world that spawned the GTA Myths community. An entire community dedicated to speculating on the weird random things in this game, because there are so many little things like this in GTA San Andreas, and people have written entire dissertations on the most innocuous details if it qualifies as a myth. Like those body bags, it's been long speculated that a random NPC in the desert who wears a top hat and a trench coat is the culprit, because he's been labeled the serial killer by the community. I saw so many myth videos about this game back in the day. That's basically how I spent my summer of 2011. I loved how this one video makes the observation that the serial killer guy bears a striking resemblance to the Undertaker. It's so stupid, but I love it. But that's the thing, there are so many aspects of this game, intended or not, which got people's minds going. And that's all because they decided that since the world is so big, they're gonna have a lot of fun with it. Hell, like I talked about earlier, I remember the mystery of exploring this world back when I first played the game, and all the mystery and intrigue I felt while playing it. It pays credence to the type of wonder that this game invoked back in the day. And of course, it's wonder you can never really recapture once you play through the game all the way. That wonder was only furthered by the fact that there are entire chunks of the map you never need to go to. Such as this area north of San Fierro called Bayside. There's a grand total of one thing in this town, and it's the boat school. And you so seldom have to drive a boat in the story that there's no real benefit to having the boat skill. Otherwise, you never have to go here, and I heard that it's because this area was a late addition to the game, so they didn't have a chance to implement anything interesting here. Which is a bit of an unfortunate waste, but it still builds into the wonder and the intrigue of this game. The same would apply for that town north of the airplane graveyard called Las Paisadas. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. They put some effort here, given that they had to model an entire animatronic chicken. Yeah, that's one big cock. Yes, that's the intended joke. Same goes for a place down south called Fort Carson, an intricate town with a lot of separate landmarks, but aside from having a respawn point, which also just so happens to be the medical clinic where Ken Rosenberg got clean, you never have a reason to come here. But that could be said about a lot of these locations. Entire towns, and in one case a city, that were put in the game but never used for anything. That just creates more intrigue and wonder about the world and how everything works and what everything is. It's the type of game that sparks so much imagination, and that's all because of how grand and epic the game world feels, and how much effort they put into making it feel that way. Despite the fact that the three main cities are very small, the game uses every square inch of its space, and it also intelligently uses its pacing to prevent the game from feeling small. Unless you're using cheats, you don't get regular access to airplanes until about 3/4 of the way through the game. Before that, if you're playing legitimately, you're on the ground level. A map like this would lose a lot of its weight if you could travel around it too quickly, but once you get to that point, you've earned the right to play around in the sky. It also helps that the game world has a certain mood to it. One thing I am absolutely hard line against is the fact that I think every release of this game past its initial release removes the color filter. There's even an option to remove the color filter in the emulator, and I hate that. I know some people hate tinting a game's color profile and prefer more natural feeling lighting without exception. Normally I'm like this as well, but I do allow for certain exceptions, this being one. Because there's something so warm and homey about this game that's ruined without the color tint. The world ends up feeling completely desaturated and slightly more lifeless. You don't really notice the color tint midday, but between the evening light all the way up to the dawn, the atmosphere gets so thick on the ground. I remember at one point during this playthrough wandering the desert at night, and I couldn't help but appreciate just how thick the night atmosphere was. This game doesn't look the best, but it sure knows how to make an appealing atmosphere, which makes a nice backdrop to the oh so wonderful gameplay. When it comes to the gameplay of San Andreas, I don't even know where to start, because there is so much. Do I start with the missions, the combat, the vehicles, what? Well, as a sandbox game, variety is the name of the game. The overall gameplay here was the final realization of everything that the previous two games were trying to do, featuring more weapons, more vehicles, and more random gameplay details than you can shake a stick at. It's worth mentioning that, like I said in my missions ranked video, GTA San Andreas, much like a lot of the games in the series, is not the greatest when you examine the individual aspects of the game, because it's less so any one thing that makes this game as great as it is, and more so all those aspects coming together. But despite that being the gauge for the overall enjoyment, everything is still significant in its own way. As a matter of fact, every individual aspect of the moment-to-moment gameplay is slightly more significant now than ever before, because this game implements an aspect never before seen in GTA, RPG elements. And I'm not talking about rocket-propelled grenades, I mean character stats. There are a bunch of them, and they each have a subtle gameplay alteration attached to them, some more subtle than others. The most front and center RPG stat in the game is respect, which makes sense, seeing as it is one of the central themes of the game. And whether deliberately or not, it levels up in accordance to your progression in the story. Like, yeah, I don't know if it's deliberately programmed this way, but as soon as I finished every mission, including the optional missions, my respect stat reached its maximum. And in tying it to the game's progression, you start out coming back home and have no street cred whatsoever. But as you do more missions and fight enemy gangs, you gradually gain the respect of your peers. Hence, respect levels up. One might even say it's a ludonarrative synchronicity, but for as central as that concept is to the game, you may be wondering how it alters the gameplay. Well, I feel like there was an opportunity to make the respect a more central element to the gameplay. Personally, I would have implemented a system wherein you needed a certain amount of respect to be able to do certain missions. Kinda like, well, exactly like what Saints Row 2 does. Because since it's a main theme, it should be important, but the actual gameplay alteration is sort of arbitrary. It just allows you to recruit more members of your gang to fight alongside you. Yeah, this is one of the game's gimmicks. Since you're operating a street gang, you're able to recruit some homies and go wreck shit. And to be honest, as cool as it is to be able to recruit random street hoodlums to help you out, they're very brittle and often die in a few seconds into any given firefight. They're also f***ing useless. I've even had it in previous playthroughs where a gunfight breaks out, causing a nearby car to freak out and run over my entire gang while attempting to get away, killing most if not all of them. Hilarious, but it also proves my point. And once you're out or running low, if you want to get more, you have to run back to your own turf. Plus, if you recruit more than 3, then you have to find a car that has more than 3 seats unless you want to go on foot. So it's a neat idea, but more trouble than it's worth. Especially because you're more than capable of doing everything by yourself. So central as it is to the story, respect isn't as central to the gameplay, but at least it's inconsequential instead of annoying. As for the other stats, the most important one would be your max health. You naturally gain max health just by doing physical activities, which includes most of what you'll be doing in the game as it is, so you get a nice steady uptick of maximum health as you go through the game, which helps as the difficulty escalates. Then you have such things as stamina, which will also level up as you run around the game world. This is one stat I'm turbo grateful for because playing games like Vice City, you'll find that you'll constantly be winded, and I wish there was a way to be able to run longer in those games. Then you have muscle, which makes your melee attack stronger and also can be upgraded by going to the gym. Body fat, which can make you slower, lower your jump height, and the game even warns you about possibly having a heart attack, though that's impossible, they never programmed a heart attack into the game. But I'm sure there's a creepypasta about that. That said, you also need to eat every now and again, because in one of the game's more superfluous and at times annoying game mechanics, you also get hungry, and as such, if you wait too long, you'll start to lose body fat and eventually muscle mass. Leave it too long and you'll even drop dead from hunger, but you have to go out of your way to do that. Lung capacity is one that causes a lot of grief because you need to upgrade the stats somewhat to be able to do the mission Amphibious Assault, which sadly is actually one of the better missions in the game, and otherwise you rarely have to swim in the entire game. Then you have all the skill upgrades. Pretty much every weapon has a levelable skill stat that comes with using the gun, letting you shoot faster, more accurately, move while shooting, and in some cases even dual wield. Then you have an individual stat for every vehicle type, which will make vehicles handle better the more you level them up. It even makes it harder to fall off bicycles or motorcycles, and lets you bunny hop higher on bikes. A lot of minor gameplay improvements you probably wouldn't even notice because they level up so gradually, but nonetheless do make the game easier as it goes along. There are a few other minor stats, like gambling, which lets you gamble with higher values, or luck, which was supposed to be implemented to give you a higher likelihood of winning while gambling, but that was never properly implemented. Also, I'm not entirely sure if I'm allowed to show you depictions of the in-game gambling minigames here. YouTube is a bit weird about that, but yes, you can gamble all your money away and even go into debt. The final notable character stat in this game would be sex appeal. Depending on what you wear and what the last car you drove was, your sex appeal will constantly be shifting. You may think that this was superfluous, but it actually does have a purpose. You see, throughout the game, you'll find random women with blue arrows over their heads. These women are potential girlfriends. If you fulfill certain criteria and have a high enough sex appeal stat, you'll be able to date them. Then through that, you'll be able to get unique perks, such as respawning with all your weapons, or free auto repair. Plus, if your sex appeal stat is at max, ladies of the night will then pay you, so you don't need to do the usual thing and kill them to get your money back. You know, that feature is so notorious that the entire moral panic surrounding GTA was built from it. And personally, I never found myself doing it all that much because sure, there is some schadenfreude in doing something while knowing that someone actively wants to prevent you from doing it, but that schadenfreude only carries you so far when the actual act of doing it is not particularly interesting after the first time. As for the girlfriends, I haven't touched this side mission since I 100%ed the game back in the day, but it's there if you feel like it. I mean, I don't even bother with Millie anymore. She's a mandatory girlfriend who you need to wine and dine, so she'll give you the key card you need for the Caligula heist, but personally, I go on one date with her and then just kill her and take the card. My CJ is a Sigma male, and Sigma male grind set Rule 63, chainsaw. The reason why I consider the character stats a major aspect of the game is because one of the things they really prioritize in this game is full character customization. This game is far from a full RPG. You can pretty much beat the game no matter what your stats are, so long as you have the right weapons, but it kind of bridges the gap between RPG and game with RPG elements, especially with the full character customization. You're always CJ, but you can change his appearance in a great many ways, up to and including fully customizing his outfit, hairstyle, and even tattoos. This might partially explain why the game looks less than stellar even for its day, because any game with a heavy customization element is going to have a difficult time accounting for every single combination of assets, and as such they have to make it look a bit more basic to make sure everything looks decent. But either way, the amount of customization here is ridiculous. You can have CJ walking around in a suit, you can make him look like Blade, you can have him running around in his skivvies. The possibilities are endless. It's all up to you, and I love the detail how you can even customize watches, chains, and sunglasses. From a gameplay standpoint, your specific outfit has no purpose other than the more expensive outfits altering your sex appeal, but it just goes to show how detail-oriented they were with this game, such as how the different stats can also alter your dialogue and the dialogue of other characters. Like how if CJ is too fat, people will comment on it in the street, and CJ's fluff dialogue will be changed to reflect the fact that he is fat.
You so fat, bitch gotta charge double.
Whatever you want to say about the implementation of specific RPG elements, it's stuff like this that really makes it worth it. I don't think it's a secret that many of the RPG elements and aspects of customization were just Rockstar Games flexing how much they could do. As superfluous as some of it is, I think it's fun. At best, it adds something to the gameplay. At worst, it doesn't get in the way. And it continues to show this game's distinctly detailed nature. Just like buying property. There's like 20 different houses you can buy all over San Andreas, many of which have unique interior designs. Like, think about this. How many times have you actually needed to buy a house in the game just to save? I'd imagine the number is quite low considering the fact that you're never too far away from a save point that you get for free. And yet, once again, so many details and places to explore are put in purely to flex the amount of unique properties they can put in the game. And theoretically, I guess they give you something to use the money on, which is funny because I feel like the economy in this game is less useless than a lot of other GTA games. Partially because they give you so many guns to work with, and because the game doesn't actually start giving you much money until a ways in. In keeping with the theming of overcoming poverty, you mostly have to rely on free weapon pickups for a lot of the game, at least until the second chapter, and once you start buying them, they don't come cheap. The only thing that cripples the economy is cheating because the only health cheat is one that also gives you $250,000. which means you can't hit it in an emergency without inadvertently killing the challenge that comes with being stingy. I'm proud of myself because I went half the game before using that cheat as a reflex, so I didn't have to redo a mission. But that's the thing, even if there are 3 separate cheats for weapon selection, I find it more fun to live off the fat of the land, so to speak. It makes the game more challenging, and makes that gradual escalation of weapon access feel more earned. Matter of fact, as the game starts out, you don't have any immediate access to guns. You don't get access to ammunition until a ways in, though in fairness, getting weapons from ammunition is generally the worst way to get weapons considering how slow it is. You need to painstakingly select a weapon type, select a specific weapon, and then buy ammo 1 clip or magazine at a time. It takes forever. You'd think in one of the updates they would make buying ammo more convenient, but I guess it never came up. And more often than not, you get plenty enough weapons just through random pickups, and at first, you're expected to fight using other means. There are a few times where you can use unorthodox weapons like spray paint, but you're mostly using melee and melee weapons at first. Even if basic non-gun combat gets supplanted for regular gun combat after a short while, I still appreciate the amount of effort that went into the melee. Like how you have 3 separate disciplines of melee combat you can learn. My favorite being the Cobra School because I enjoy the humor of a big black guy fighting like a ninja. Kinda reminds me of the movie Black Dynamite.
I threw that shit before I walked in the room!
That, along with Don't Be a Menace to South Central while drinking your juice in the hood, are probably the best parody blaxploitation films ever made. I'm also partial to gay you-know-whats from outer space, but that one's a bit more complicated. The melee combat is basic, but good enough for what it is, and I enjoy the variety of melee weapons you get. Picture an item you can hit somebody with in a bar fight, and there's a reasonable chance that it's in the game. Even if they're not the most useful after a while, it's still fun to play around with just for the lulz. The king in that regard would be the samurai sword. I remember the first time I got access to one of these is when I found it randomly, and I had so much fun chopping people's heads off, because secretly I'm a psycho and enjoy that type of thing. But there's also 2 separate sexual weapons in the game, one of which can be found if you go into one of the police precincts, that being a double-ended dildo, and another one can be found in a garbage dump in the Bayside area, which is a vibrator. Both these weapons occupy the same space as the can of spray paint or the camera called the handheld item slot, and not the melee weapons slot, which is also the case for such weapons as canes and flowers. Yes, you can technically use flowers as a weapon. Many of these weapons are functionally identical and have no purpose other than stupid novelty, but novelty is more than enough when you have this many weapons. Still, like I said, it doesn't take too long for guns to be introduced, at which point melee weapons pretty much go out the window forever outside of a few specific instances. I remember saying in one of my videos about Bully how unfortunate it is that so many games do revolve around gun combat rather than more creative weaponry. Because it doesn't matter how fun other methods of combat are, the moment you can give someone a handheld device that can kill people from 20 feet away and has tons of ammo, it's a point of no return where the rest of the game pretty much has to be built around that. Which is not to say I don't like the gun combat. The gun combat is perfectly functional. On console, it has an auto lock-on system, which was definitely necessary for a game like this, and yeah, you lock onto people with your reticle and you shoot them with various guns, and the different guns have minor differences. Like how assault rifles have the chance of blowing people's heads off, but otherwise you press the button and people have a tendency of dying and you have to be careful not to die yourself. In games like this, gun combat is a tool, a nice, easy, basic, all-around functional mechanic that doesn't create a lot of excitement in itself, but can be used to create excitement depending on the circumstance, and there certainly is a lot of that. There are plenty of missions and situations otherwise that build themselves for maximum excitement with a bunch of squishy goons that die in a satisfying way, but are also numerous and tough enough that getting through on 1 health bar can be challenging. What people sometimes forget is that this was in an era where GTA was kinda hard. Once you die, you lose all your weapons and you only get 1 chance to do any given mission. At most, sometimes they let you skip the commute if you have to do the mission again, which I appreciate, but otherwise, this game can be stiff as a shot of Jack at times. There's only 1 mission in the entire game with a checkpoint, and it's the final mission. So there's a lot of tension here at times if you're not the type of crap out to cheat to regain any lost health at any given opportunity. So many of the situations are satisfying to get through just because of fear of losing progress. So you have a nice, comfortable level of enjoyable action, elevated by the presentation of the action being exciting and relentless at times. which creates a base level of enjoyment that the rest of the game can spring off from, especially once they start introducing the things that subvert the standard gameplay. The exact same thing can be said about the driving as well. I can't speak on how the driving feels from a mechanical point of view because I'm kinda tone deaf when it comes to driving games. I tend to enjoy more arcadey driving on account of the fact that I do prefer to feel like I'm not fighting against the game to get from point A to point B, and this game definitely has some very arcadey physics. Just like the rest of the game, it has a rule of fun in place where if you really want to dissect the inadequacies of the driving physics, I'm sure you could, but at that point, you're kinda missing the point. On top of that, they're trying to make it more accessible to the layman. Personally, I enjoy the physics, it makes for an easy time, every vehicle feels slightly distinct but functionally similar, and it makes for some fun times if you're pulling off sick action or just exploring. The vehicle damage is a bit basic, a lot of pre-baked damage textures and some mild model warping as far as the individual cars are concerned. You also occasionally have things falling off the cars, and when you do damage the car to a point of being totaled, this game has exactly one explosion animation, once again in keeping with the fact that the game is very thinly spread in places. With that said, however, this game being thinly spread as far as vehicle damage physics is in aid of the vehicle variety. There are legitimately over 180 separate vehicles in this game you can drive. You heard me right, 180. Vehicles of all variety, planes, helicopters, sports cars, motorcycles, those weird towing vehicles you see in airports, the works. They had so much fun including whatever vehicles they could think of. It's one of those aspects of discovery within the overall sandbox that makes exploration so rewarding in that there's so much to find. And there are definitely a few holy grails as far as finding vehicles. I remember being in disbelief when I saw the game had a jetpack. And the moment I had it, I was gaily flying around with the greatest of ease, pulling off drive-bys from the air. It was a revelation. Of course, I realize now it's not the greatest vehicle for actually getting around because it's fairly slow and doesn't get very high, but the sheer novelty is a work of art. Especially for how rare jetpacks were and in many ways still are in games. Another vehicle that I was absolutely amazed by at the time was the idea of the AT-400. An actual commercial airliner that's so big you need a platform to even be able to get into it to begin with. It's so big that it has no function and it's not integrated into the story at all. I think it's the vehicle that's used if you use the air travel function to fast travel from city to city, something I didn't even know existed until I stumbled across it after playing the game for a couple years. And I'm sure many people didn't know it existed either, because the game doesn't tell you it exists. But whether this thing is useful or useless, you can't tell me you didn't feel like mommy's big boy the first time you flew this thing. And while there are plenty of standard workaday vehicles you can find at any given time, there are so many weird and obscure ones that have so much novelty to them. Like the go-kart. Driving this thing is so much fun. Or the absolute giant truck in the quarry. The type of thing that would require the hand of God to tow if this thing ever broke down. There's even a pimpmobile. That's awesome. The SWAT tank is the most heartbreaking one because this is a vehicle that only appears in the final mission, and as such, to access it, you have to abandon the mission and drive it to your garage. And the funny thing is, a significant chunk of the ground vehicles you can find in this game are each customizable. The most customizable would be anything that qualifies as a lowrider. You can bring them to the VLA mechanic shop in South Los Santos, and you can absolutely go nuts with customizing these things, with each variety of lowrider having different levels of ridiculousness in the customization. Something you can legitimately spend tens of thousands of dollars on. But even most of the rest of the vehicles are customizable if you bring them to a transfender location. It's not usually the most extensive, and the customization is taken on a case-by-case basis, but you can still have fun with the customization as you choose. Outside of maybe giving you a temporary advantage for an upcoming mission, it's mostly done for its own sake. But much like the vehicles themselves, there's a level of versatility and variety here that can keep you busy for ages. So the summary of the moment-to-moment gameplay is you have solid but not mind-blowing combat combined with solid but not mind-blowing driving physics inside a world that may not be big by today's standards but was massive for its day, and still manages to feel big. Given that this was my first major open-world game, just experiencing these mechanics in a structureless environment was so much fun, and in many ways is still fun. Even if the novelty has worn off, it's still fun to just blow off whatever you're supposed to be doing and have a rampage. Start spree killing random pedestrians or getting into a car and running them over so they instantly flatten under your bumper or go flying into the air, both in equally comical ways. It's not sophisticated, but it's enjoyable, and part of the fun is also seeing how long you can last against the police. Famously, the GTA series has a 6-star wanted level, or used to before GTA 5 capped it at 5 stars, in a metaphor for the entire game. And for every star you gain, you get stiffer and stiffer opposition, starting with regular cops, then they send helicopters, then they send SWAT team members, then they send the FBI, which in all honesty feels a bit odd considering I don't think the FBI is filled with a bunch of Special Forces members better equipped than a SWAT team. Regardless, when you have the big 6 stars is when the National Guard gets sent in, at which point God have mercy on your soul because particularly when the tanks get involved, you're up the creek without a paddle. Even better is when you're flying a plane or a helicopter. From 4 stars, they send Hydra jets at you. Just so we're clear, Hydra jet is what the fighter jet is called in this game. It's not a jet where Red Skull is flying. Either way, if you yourself are flying a Hydra jet, that means you can engage in homing missile-based dogfights, and this is something I would spend ages doing back in the day, and I enjoy doing it because it's a nice simple emergent gameplay activity that's stupidly fun. There are another couple lost videos that I've made just about this. I don't know, something about shooting down a military jet while listening to Freebird is an experience that you can't really get anywhere else. Incidentally, as far as the soundtrack is concerned in this game, as a classic rock and metalhead, my radio station of choice has always been KDST or The Dust. Radio X is alright, but I think Radio X is a bit more inconsistent. It has some absolute bangers like the Ozzy Osbourne cover of Hellraiser, or Them Bones by Alice in Chains, but for my tastes, it has just as many misses as hits, whereas the music on KDST tends not to have that much bite, but are generally more pleasant. The soundtrack for my tastes isn't as good as Vice City, but that's because they tended to focus more on rap in this game, which is fine. I do, however, miss my custom soundtrack option from the PC version. Funny story too, I remember I was playing this game in a call on Discord one time, and I was playing a custom soundtrack, and my friend, well, my former friend who was in the call watching the stream, said, wait a minute, when was this game set? Because I was listening to, I want to say, New Divide by Linkin Park. I said, oh, it's set in 1992. In the silence, I could feel the cogs turning in that guy's head. Good times. But god, that guy's a shithead. But anyways, of course aimless rampages are pretty much the thing that this series is most well known for. Hell, back in the early days it was practically the primary activity. That's because it never ceases to be enjoyable. Wanton destruction and violence in a consequence-free environment is practically the mission statement of video games as a whole. But especially in this series. But especially Bot. But even still, I wouldn't say that's necessarily where everything comes together. As I discovered all those years ago, aimless screwing about is all well and good, but the majority of your enjoyment will come from the missions themselves. Despite how much I can talk up these mechanics, there's no doubt that it's not necessarily what you're here for overall. Because, like I said, if you take every single mechanic at face value, it does them a disservice. The game doesn't sell itself on any one thing it does. Well, arguably it does on the thing that the game's named after, but anyways, it sells itself on the total package, and these mechanics create a clean blank canvas for the game to go absolutely nuts with. And that's where the mission string comes in. It's once you get into the mission string where all these different mechanics and more come together. And much like the game itself, since the mechanics are so wide and so varied, you find yourself with a lot of different mission types. You have heavily action-focused missions like the meat business where you go into a meatpacking facility and accidentally find yourself in a situation where you have to fight through 100 guys. St. Mark's Bistro where you have to fly to Liberty City and cut through the entire Forelli family. Up and away where you have to break into a military fuel dump and steal a crane copter big enough to steal an armored vehicle, and meanwhile you have to fight through half the army to get there. Gray Imports where you have to fight through a Russian gang-owned shipping and receiving depot and take out a particular target. Or Pier 69 where you have to fight through an army of gang members associated with the Loco Syndicate and finally take out T-Bone and Ryder. All missions where you have to gun down everyone with no mercy and not much else. And they're all awesome. Then you have the missions that are primarily driving focused, such as the handful of mandatory races you have to do, as well as missions in the car depot you can buy, or missions like OG Alok where you have to chase down a guy named Freddy who OG Alok allegedly had relations with in prison.
Don't you say a damn thing, CJ. Was you lonely, Lo? Hey, I like a nice mustache myself.
What about the mission T-Bone Mendez where we have to chase down a bunch of people to get packages that they've stolen? And it's all done via motorcycle, which isn't nearly done enough in this game. All fun missions that elevates driving from standard commuting to something awesome. Then you have missions based around unique vehicles, like the Mission Monster, where you have to do a race around a course in a monster truck, or Cutthroat Business, where you have to chase down OG Loke in various comedic vehicles, including a go-kart. Then there's a couple of missions where you have to be the gunner while somebody else drives, like the second half of Reuniting the Families, or the second half of Just Business. Then there's a handful of stealth missions, such as Mad Dog's Rhymes, where you have to break into his mansion, steal his rhyme book, and get out using stealthy methods, or Dam and Blast, where you have to find your way into a hydroelectric dam so you can set the charges for a timed sabotage later down the line. You have missions that introduce a game mechanic or an entire minigame, such as Home Invasion introducing the Home Invasion minigame, or Supply Lines introducing a minigame where you get to fly around in an RC plane. Then you have a bunch of missions that base themselves around one-time gimmicks that never show up again, like Fender Ketchup having a unique game mechanic of scaring someone through extreme driving, Catalyst where you have to toss a bunch of crates to Ryder using a one-time throwing minigame, or what about New Model Army, which introduces an entire game mode based around using model vehicles to escort a particular vehicle through an obstacle course? Or Robbing Uncle Sam, where you have to use a forklift to steal a bunch of weapon crates, though the forklift does briefly appear again in Breaking the Bank at Caligula's. And if not one-time gimmicks, sometimes they base themselves around mechanics that simply don't come up that often, such as Stowaway, where it's short and a bit difficult at first on account of having to chase a plane and get into the back of it before it gets away, but then once you're in, you have to fight primarily using melee, because if you shoot any of your guns and miss, it'll cause the entire plane to blow up. All you need to do is find a parachute, plant a charge, and make your getaway. Simple but classic. Or Burning Desire, which bases itself around starting and then putting out fires, even resulting in you finding a girlfriend, which then begins that particular side activity. How about Misappropriation, which has just about everything, but primarily it's a helicopter chase, which is extremely rare, and the mission has a versatility where you can destroy both helicopters before the guy has a chance to get away, destroy the helicopter mid-air, or even chase him down in a car once he lands, though by that point, his pathfinding starts to go haywire. It's both varied and unique. The sheer variety in the mission list is astounding, and you never quite know what you're getting into whatsoever when you start a new mission. Of course, most of them in some way are based around standard combat or standard driving, but enough of them have enough unique aspects for at least a portion of them that it gives the game a constant freshness that's undeniable. It just shows how absolutely versatile this game is and how many different small details they included that they can have all these different mission types. I mean, think back to GTA 3, only 3 years before this. It was groundbreaking for its day, but in the grandness of time was somewhat unremarkable as far as gameplay variety. Outside of introducing this style of sandbox to the gaming world, the gameplay stuck to a few basic templates. But this is the vision fully realized, where practically every single mission and every single activity is its own unique thing. Of course, there are some infamous missions, like Life's a Beach for example, where you have to do an asinine rhythm game to gain access to a van you have to steal. That mission is such a chore. Generally, the most infamous missions in this game include the Zero side missions and of course Wrong Side of the Tracks, neither of which I think are overly hard these days. Wrong Side of the Tracks is easy enough so long as you stay the correct distance away from the train, and failing that, there's always a workaround where you can jump on the train itself from this support beam. As for the Zero missions, I actually find them more enjoyable than most missions in the game because I don't find them particularly hard. They're relentless but perfectly manageable. In Zero's first mission, Air Raid, I was able to get through it pretty easily with more than half my health. You may remember it being hard, I certainly do, but we were also very young, and in all honesty, I kinda love Zero's second mission Supply Lines because it's kinda cool and kinda zen to just fly around in a small RC plane, because you don't get enough flying missions in the game as it is, let alone flying missions where you're not in imminent danger. Especially when flying at low altitudes, because flying at low altitudes in a regular plane, well, it's just a matter of time before you crash, but you can crash as many times as you want in an RC plane. I've heard it said that people consider this a hard mission because it's at the point in the game where you wouldn't have spent much time flying, so a lack of experience would lead a player to not know what they're doing. After playing it in its original form, I can confirm that's not necessarily true because they absolutely did give you significantly more fuel in later versions of the game. In this version, you're barely given enough. Even still, I managed to get through it on my second try by doing something that would normally feel unorthodox, and that's going for the targets that are closer to you first. Not the other way around, because there are 3 targets almost right next to you as you start, and if you wait, they will be further away and more spread out. By doing that, you should easily be able to get back with 10 to 20% of your fuel left. Also, something I had to find out the hard way, this is one of those missions that breaks if you're playing at 60 FPS, because in that case, your fuel consumption doubles. You won't even make it to and from the far targets before running out in that case. If you want my least favorite missions, first of all, you have learning to fly, which is a right pain in the ass considering the fact that there are 4 separate schools for the 4 separate vehicle types in the game, 3 of which are completely optional. Unfortunately, the most obnoxious one is also the mandatory one. It goes on forever, getting a good grade is a pain in the ass, and so much of it is completely unnecessary. But the worst missions universally are the ones where you need to travel a long distance to do basically nothing. Don Peyote, where you have to drive to and from the desert, and you have to make sure to have a 4-door car, which aren't in abundance in the desert. There's Snail Trail, where you have to drive from San Fierro to Los Santos and then follow a guy from a train station all the way to the Santa Maria Pier just to kill him and his cohort. Then you have Photo Opportunity, where you have to drive from San Fierro to the very corner of the map, and you have to do it in Caesar's car. And the action to this mission is just taking a few pictures, and if you crash Caesar's car, no second chances.
How many of these clowns are there?
Ah, I know a pimp when I see one. They being clever about this. It ain't no exchange of nothing incriminating. I don't know what we're yelling about!
But the worst of the worst has to be the absolutely abysmal key to her heart. We have to slowly and laboriously tail a kinky croupier from her job to a certain type of shop, and then all the way back home. The thing is, I'm not inherently against driving missions as a rule, it's more so the fact that driving can either be a commute or it can be an active and necessary part of the mission. And missions like this are the absolute worst example of everything being a commute and nothing more. And when a mission is all commute and no action, it's boring as hell. But that's the worst of it. I would say that most of the missions in this game are at the very least okay, but there are some bomb-ass missions as well. An OE, for example, is a mission where you have to skillfully fly at low altitudes across the entire state. Otherwise, you'll find yourself being chased by some military jets. It's funny though, this time, once the mission was functionally over, I decided to see what would happen if I stayed above the height limit for a while, and it's not that much of a danger because the Hydra jets that chase you don't actually chase you super aggressively, and honestly it's more fun this way because dogfighting doesn't happen nearly enough in this game, especially because they have missiles and you have a gun. The funny thing is as well, they were constantly going in a circle and were so close to crashing, and I was so determined to watch them crash because that would have been a 1 in a million shot, but unfortunately I couldn't make it happen. They also tail you at your elevation, so even if you're on the ground, they will fly around like 6 feet into the air until they happen to crash. God, that was so funny. This portion of the mission almost overshadows the rest of the mission, which is a masterclass of skillful flying, which is so satisfying to pull off, yet so rare. And if it's dogfighting you want, it's dogfighting you'll get with Vertical Bird. This is my favorite mission in the game, bar none. You have to break into a military base, which previously would give you a 5-star wanted level if you were anywhere near it, and you have to fight your way through, steal a Hydra jet, have a dogfight with some other Hydra jets, then blow up some boats. It's non-stop, varied, adrenaline-fueled action, and my only complaint is that it doesn't go on for long enough. It's also another mission that emphasizes stealth, but you can also just shoot people if you really want. Then we have missions like the Da Nang thing, where we have to infiltrate a ship that the Da Nang boys are operating on. But here's the twist, you're flying through on a helicopter, but it gets shot down, and you find yourself on the boat with nothing but your knife. A bit contrived, but it means you have to go through this entire mission using nothing but weapons you can salvage off people you've killed. So you stealth kill the first guy, then you fight like hell through the rest of the crew. It's organic excitement, the mission. The Black Project is another big one, because in that case you have to stealth your way into a military base and steal a secret government project. Properly stealthing my way through the entire mission is something I've only ever been able to do once, but it's not that big of a deal because you can just go in guns blazing and break into the base via an air vent. But still, it's a fun mission where you have tons of combat and an entire area in the military base to explore. Plus, this is also where you get access to the jetpack, and you already know what I think about the jetpack. Unfortunately, because of the cheat that spawns the jetpack, I knew about the jetpack long before this mission, but I can't even begin to imagine how awesome this would have been had I experienced it fresh, without knowing that this was going to be the payoff. Then you have missions like Just Business, where you have to roll into this big atrium and take out a bunch of Russian gang members, followed by an extended chase through the Los Santos trenches, which I'm pretty sure is an extended reference to Terminator 2.
Yeah, I've seen this one. This is a classic.
Breaking the bank at Caligula's is a classic, utilizing stealth action, some more obscure content, and it's all topped off with a base jump, which is one of the more annoying parts of the game. Not because it's hard, but because it's actually easy if you know what to do. They alter the gravity for this chunk, so you travel towards the opposite building much quicker than you fall. So you're actually advised to wait before pulling out the parachute. I never knew that until recently, so egg on my face. It's because of that weird gravity that I actually missed it this time as well, but I still didn't take no for an answer and eventually found my way back up, because even though the police helicopters are just regular helicopters with a spotlight, you still don't get to fly them nearly enough, so I take every opportunity I can to do so. But still, an epic mission worthy of the setup. I could go over all the individual best missions, but I've already done that in a separate video. The point is, there are a lot of missions, and as such, there's going to be a wide spread of quality. I would say the best missions in the game are the ones where they take advantage of a wide variety of various game mechanics. Have you do multiple things in the mission rather than just have you do one single thing, because this game is at its best when it's utilizing as many of its attributes as possible. Failing that, the best missions will otherwise be ones that take advantage of more obscure, lesser used mechanics, or perhaps the missions that create entirely unique environments for that single mission. I mean, thinking about it, missions like the Black Project and Vertical Bird are the best in the game because they do all three of these things. That's the bottom line. Utilize everything you can, create an instant classic. But in keeping with just how much content there is in this game, once you get away from the specific story missions, there's like 100 different side activities for you to do. Sure, things like taxi missions, vigilante missions, and ambulance missions were there in previous games, but the amount of random activities you can do in this game is just ridiculous. Much like how you can't throw a stone without finding some fun detail in the environment, you can't throw a stone without finding a unique minigame. Step outside of CJ's house and there's a basketball court for you to shoot hoops in. Sure, it's completely pointless, but it had to be specifically programmed. It's simple and only good for a few minutes of fun, but I love that it exists. There are different video games to play within the game, such as They Came From Uranus, another thing that's only good for a few minutes of fun, but once again is cool to have. Also, fun fact, the console is called the CJD 500. I think the name is a pseudo mashup of the Amiga 500 and the Commodore CD32. I think this was sort of a tribute to the Commodore line of Amiga computers, which is what Rockstar Games as DMA design got their start on. But if you want to talk about random awesome minigames, you can look no further than the burglary side mission. This is one that eluded me for a while growing up, because I did not know where to find the burglary truck after the mission home invasion. I kept stealing armored trucks, but the truck you actually need to get is near your house in Los Santos. Also in San Fierro, but they don't tell you about that one. And I have so much fun with this mission. Sometimes I will use the cheat to lock the game to midnight so I can continue doing this mission for as long as I want, because in spite of the fact you have to always get back to your lockup by 6 AM, and the lockup is in Los Santos, also in San Fierro, but they don't tell you. You can go all over the state and find houses that you can break into. Even in Bayside. They didn't bother doing anything in Bayside as far as the mission path is concerned, but they programmed interiors to some of those houses. And it's always fun to find one of those big houses with lots of stuff in it and just go to town. Almost as fun as those houses where you walk in and you're immediately confronted by a bunch of people sitting on a couch, so you have to immediately run away. That's fun. It's such a detailed minigame, even though it's not required for game completion, it's done entirely for its own sake. Yet something about it is so unbelievably absorbing. Aside from that, you can bet on horse races, which is one of those things you have to go out of your way to find because they're not on the map. The same goes for spending time at a gentleman's club. If you don't know it's there, you have to stumble across it. You can do any number of gambling games. You can even go into debt with the mafia by gambling, which will then cause a bunch of debt collectors to constantly chase you down until you're back in the green. Sometimes I do this just for my own amusement. They also made the inclusion of such things as pimping missions, freighter missions, long-haul trucking missions, quarry missions, courier missions, and possibly other missions on top of the occupational missions that were already there. You can do different challenges and races at the different arenas throughout the game, including a demolition derby. You can play pool and then beat your opponent with a pool cue if you lose. There's an optional minigame that only happens in the middle chunk of the game where you can disrupt Big Smoke's supply lines. There are triathlons you can do, and the game makes no indication that they exist. Like so much about this game, you have to go out of your way to find it. Once again, seemingly put in just so Rockstar Games could flex. But it's all awesome. If you feel like it, there are even multiple different types of collectibles you can find. In Los Santos, you can tag over various gang tags. In San Fierro, you can take various pictures. In Las Venturas, you can collect horseshoes, and all around the state, you can collect oysters in the water, each of which provide their own rewards. Sure, these are things I wouldn't really mess around with now because collecting things for various rewards is a bit tedious, but this is something I was more than happy to indulge with when my options were limited and I had hours to burn playing this game. On top of everything, there's even a multiplayer mode in this game, where if you find one of these icons that indicate a two-player mode, you can do either structured or unstructured gameplay with a second player. Sure, it's a bit vapid and half-baked, but this was so much fun back in the day when you can just mess around with a buddy. You can even make CJ make out with some old redneck dude. That's hilarious. CJ is a total bicon. This game is bursting at the seams with side content you can do to the point where you probably don't even know half of it is there. Like, that was part of the fun back in the day, was just trying to find all the things that the developers had thought of and constantly finding yourself with more and more small tidbits. It all comes back to that element of exploration and discovery, something a lot of sandbox devs seemingly don't bother to prioritize, even though it's arguably the best parts of games like this, because a lot of developers are too afraid that you won't be able to experience every single thing they put in, so they shove it in your face. The cream of the crop of the side content would probably be the gang territory minigame. I guess I don't know how most people actually feel about this particular side quest, but it's something that I personally enjoy quite a bit. I absolutely despise when they make actual missions based around this minigame, such as the 3 separate missions within the final chapter of the game, where there are story missions which are nothing more than this minigame. Really just goes to show you they were coming down to the wire at the end there. But the actual minigame itself is actually pretty fun. You have to roll up into enemy territory and kill a certain number of gang members to trigger a gang war, after which you have to survive 3 different waves of increasingly tougher and tougher enemies. It's basically the combat missions in this game boiled down to their simplest form, and I suppose that these days the whole territory takeover thing is a bit passé, but this was fairly innovative and I still think it's just fun for the pure action spectacle. Even while I wish the game would give you some reward other than completion percentage once you take over all the gang territories. Matter of fact, I wish there were more territories to take over throughout the entire state. Isolating this just to Los Santos feels like a bit of a missed opportunity when you could easily make this bigger. I don't know what the breaking point is where something like this that's cool starts to become tedious when you do it too much, but I don't know. All I know is I'd be happy to do more than just take over Los Santos. Okay, I think this was a glitch. But the thing is, wanting more is actually par for the course for the entire game, believe it or not. Because even though this game is long and bursting at the seams with content, it still somehow doesn't feel like it takes full advantage of everything that it has just because there's so much. I think that's why this game had the modding community that it had, and I guess still has to this day, although Rockstar Games has done everything it can to shut that shit down. Because for as long as this game is, it has so many systems in place that many of the game's mechanics don't get that much time to shine. There's only a small handful of dedicated stealth missions for a start, only a couple missions where you have to use a fire extinguisher to put out fire. Dogfights in airplanes is something you only get a taste of. There are things that have enough depth that they could have dedicated entire mission strings to them, but you only end up doing them once or twice because there's so much to get through. And it makes those missions awesome, but it also leaves you wanting more, which is why mods are so important, giving you more of the things that were only touched upon in the main game due to time or budget restraints. That's just how good this game is. It's an all-time great game, but still had unrealized potential in all the things you could do with the various systems in place. And it would probably take you multiple lifetimes to go over all the mods that this game has. Mods that have existed pretty much since the moment the game came out on PC. That's barely an exaggeration. I'm pretty sure the first mods for GTA San Andreas came out the same day it came out for PC. But of course, the most famous mod would be the hot coffee mod. This game originally had a graphic sex minigame that you could activate at the end of a date with one of the potential girlfriends you could get, and this was cut from the game due to ESRB regulations, but it also was cut so late into development that they opted just to lock the content off rather than removing it outright. But it took all of 2 days for it to be unlocked once the game came out for PC, and this unleashed a media firestorm the likes of which Rockstar Games had never seen before. And this was Rockstar Games. I think I've joked before that aside from Jack Thompson doing what Jack Thompson did best at the time and sued Rockstar Games, Hillary Clinton also threw her hat into the ring in what is definitely the second most embarrassing day of her life because she made a complete ass out of herself. It's crazy to me how far-reaching a simple sex minigame can be considering all the other horrible things you can do in this game. really just goes to show you the inherent hypocrisy in society, how blood and gore is all well and good, but God help you if you show a nipple. Which is funny because I've seen the hot coffee minigame, and I have no reason not to suspect that the minigame was completed before release, and so that was the intended final state, and guess what? Both characters are at least semi-clothed. So it's not even nudity, it's just the act of intercourse taking place that got these people in a tizzy. Then again, when your husband is Bill Clinton, I guess you'd feel resentful of human sexuality being presented in a positive way by people who actually have the ability to enjoy it. Either way, while it's not necessarily fair to judge this game based off the modding scene because that's a separate aspect from the game itself, seeing the sheer amount of mods is just proof how versatile and enduring this game is. I remember back in the day seeing the multiplayer mod when it launched and having my mind blown at how something like that could even exist. Even to this day, I'm not entirely sure how something like that could exist because surely modifying a game to create your own multiplayer servers should be impossible, right? These people would disagree. Unfortunately, because I was a console player, I never got to experience these mods. But it's fortunate that the game itself came with its own set of mods already pre-installed, except they weren't called mods. They were called cheats. This right here is my absolute favorite part of the game. The GTA series was known for its cheats even back then because for whatever reason, the people at Rockstar Games never saw cheats as glorified debugging tools for the purposes of testing a game. They saw them as a vital aspect and fun part of the game. This is possibly the best example of that philosophy because with the game engine being as versatile and varied as it is, they decided to put in dozens of distinct cheats. I remember when my sister printed those cheats out, and I was in awe, because I couldn't believe that all these cheats could possibly be functional. Some of them had to be doubles, right? Some of them had to be fake, right? But no, they were all legit. It's the type of thing that can extend the shelf life of a game by hours upon hours. It just shows you how many systems they implemented in this game that there are so many things to alter. Like, were you disappointed that the riot in the third act of the game was isolated to Los Santos and only lasted for a few missions? There's a cheat for that. Where you activate the riot anytime and have it be statewide instead. Have you ever wanted to punch people and have them fly 30 feet? There's a cheat for that. Have you ever wanted to bunny hop 100 feet into the air? There's a cheat for that. Are you disappointed your ability to recruit people is isolated to your gang members in Los Santos? There's a cheat for that. Have you ever wanted to see cars fly? There's a cheat for that. This is the cherry on top that elevates the game from classic to all-time classic. I can't even begin to go over all the different cheats in this game because there are so many different ways they decided to completely functionally alter this game through the codes. It's genuinely the type of thing that can create hours of emergent gameplay just by seeing how you can abuse the programming. Like, I remember back in the day, one of my favorite things to do was to activate the cars fly cheat, hop on top of a car, spook the driver, which makes them drive fast enough to start flying, and see how far they would fly. I also loved how using the infinite ammo cheat turned rocket launchers rapid fire. You can't even begin to imagine the amount of random chaos you can create with something like that. I loved activating the riot mode, which would make a lot of people start fist fighting, then activate super punch mode, which would then turn everybody into One Punch Man. It was so entertaining to see. And because the game is so customizable, they have several cheats for you to completely change the theming of the world around you. Silly theme, beach theme, they even make all the pedestrians Elvis. I guess if anybody has the theory that Elvis is not only alive but also part of an alien hive mind, this would certainly confirm some things. Then there's also some pointless cheats like cars float away when hit, which is just entertaining. I remember spending ages trying to make a car float and then get into the car before it floats away. I managed to do it before, and even better is when the car's fly cheat is also active, which makes you fly twice as fast and also allows you to go beyond the game height limit. Not to mention, if you have these two cheats active at the same time and hit a pedestrian, they'll fly away like Doc Brown in the DeLorean. Now that's epic. Then we get to the vehicle spawning cheats. There are so many fun vehicles in this game, but so many of them are hard to access or aren't accessible until late into the game. But they give you the option to spawn a good majority of the really fun ones at your leisure. The Vortex hovercraft, the quad bike, the monster truck, the Hunter attack helicopter, the Caddy, though I haven't watched him since 2016, so I'm not sure how much I would get out of this. You can spawn a tank, which you usually don't see outside of the maximum 6-star wanted level, and the tanks are great because they will cause any vehicle you collide with to explode. And you can also put a cheat in to make any vehicle a tank in that sense, where they will instantly cause vehicles to explode upon contact. And the cream of the crop, the Hydra Jet. A vehicle that normally takes until almost the end of the game to unlock regular access to, and it's the coolest vehicle in the game outside of the jetpack, but I have already banged on about that. It's the vehicle of choice for getting around in any situation. In fact, I remember once I started to become comfortable cheating in my 100% playthrough, I actually ended up cheating over 700 times before I 100%ed the game because suddenly I wasn't concerned about not being able to activate specific missions. At least 80% of that was me spawning the Hydra so I could get from place to place quicker. It's to the point where the cheat is permanently burnt into my skull. Triangle, triangle, square, circle, X, L1, L1, down, up. It's not the only cheat that's permanently burnt into my skull. Circle, right, left, square, triangle, up. R1, R2, L1, X. Left, down, right, up. Left, down, right, up. Just to name a few. I can gush and have gushed about these cheats for a really long time. If you take nothing else from this video, it's the fact that the cheats can extend the game's playtime by a significant chunk of time and are hella fun to mess around with. And I really lament the fact that cheats have gone out of fashion in recent years. Sure, there are plenty of mods you can play around with, but that's not really the same thing, because there are a lot of things that the average player won't think of that the developer might think of while they're making the thing, because they have such an ingrained understanding of the inner workings of what they're working on. The only drawback is, like I said, the more you cheat, the more you risk making the game catastrophically bug out. It starts with cars blowing up twice, and it only gets worse from there, up to and including making the game unwinnable. That's why the game warns you every time you save, so do this at your own risk. I guess that's just the side effect when you're making a game this big. I mean, there are several things in this game that are noted to corrupt saves or make the game unwinnable. Like apparently in the original version, if you save at Mad Dog's mansion, then that has a chance of disabling certain activities. Thankfully, there's a pretty common patch to fix this that's thankfully been included in the emulator. But even though I am playing this on an emulator specifically visually made to look like it did on the PS2 because it's the way I remember playing the game, there are still plenty of better ways to play the game these days. Not the remaster though, that can go to hell. Even after multiple years of bug fixing, that version is still a mess. You know, if there's one thing to take away from this game, whether it's the thinly spread but massive scale, the dozens of varied missions, the epic story, the epic world, the different side activities, and the absolute behemoth of this game as far as what it means to get 100%, it's the fact that Grand Theft Auto San Andreas is less of a game and more of a lifestyle choice, especially back then. Because like I said, for a kid like me who primarily played console games, nothing had ever felt so epic that it could take me well over 100 hours to beat everything. There truly was nothing like this at the time. It's just a shame it kinda loses steam by the end. So as far as story context, Tenpenny is arrested for suspicion of corruption. However, thanks to the dossier that CJ got, he's acquitted of all charges due to lack of evidence. This then sparks a series of riots across Los Santos, particularly in the South Central region. Presumably this is because everybody within the region most affected by gang violence knows all about his corruption as they've seen it firsthand. If there's one thing I wish we would have gotten, it's the perspective of the average person and what Tenpenny did to them that inspired them to riot. Either way, this is the in-universe equivalent of the Rodney King riots that I mentioned earlier. Unfortunately, there's only a few missions left, including the final mission. In this case, Sweet tells you that if they take over enough gang turf, they're bound to find out where Smoke is hiding. And that's what you do. You isolate him to a rundown apartment building retrofitted as a drug fortress. Only one way in, and only one way out. It's not my favorite mission, but it's definitely up there, and it certainly is the most elaborate mission. Fighting through multiple floors and through countless thugs to eventually get to Big Smoke and finally put him in his place.
I guess we better do this shit then.
That said, while the boss fight could be tough, if you know where to find a minigun or two, he goes down in a second. But then plot twist, it's not over. Tenpenny steals all of Smoke's cash and tries to make a break for it with the help of some starry-eyed rookie police officers. CJ narrowly avoids being shot only for Tenpenny to freak out and set off a chain reaction that will eventually blow up the building. So you need to move double quick, fighting just as many thugs but also putting out fires and getting out within the time limit. This is incredibly fun. Moments like this are when the game's at its best, combining multiple different attributes one after another, as well as having sick, tense action. It feels like I'm in a Die Hard movie, although if you didn't notice the game only has exactly one explosion animation before this, well, you certainly will now. This is where the mission gets a bit worse because the next part is just a chase where you have to stop the ever-ambitious Sweet from being killed. after which you just play the gunner for a little while, and you have to protect the car, only for Tenpenny to eventually do himself in. Fun fact as well, if you know about this breakable part of the bridge, you can actually drive through it as early as the beginning of the game. Talk about foreshadowing. So Tenpenny dies a lonely, pathetic death in the middle of the very neighborhoods that he spent years antagonizing. Too pathetic to even put a bullet in.
You never understood what I did. 50 of me, and this town would be okay.
Nobody has to take the fall for killing him, it's entirely by accident. Truly the end of the line. Because every bit of crime he ever committed, every aspect of his antagonism, any potential downfall as a result of taking revenge on him, died with him. And you have a great callback.
See you around, officer.
See you around like a donut, Carl.
Officer Pendlebury's down.
And the final part of the ending is a bit lame, if I'm being honest. Everyone goes inside the Johnson household and talks about what they're gonna do next. Sweet even reinforces that he cares about nothing but the Grove. Then Mad Dog presents his first gold record. Makar, who's also there, also talks about getting breast implants. And CJ decides to hit the streets. I'm not sure if it would have been too saccharine, but I remember in the mission right before the ending mission, Caesar talks about how he wants to pop the question to Kendall.
Oh shit, you mean pop the question? Well, I'm okay with that. You know, I appreciate you asking my permission and shit, but
Nah, no, you're cool.
I feel like we should have seen that. Either way, credits roll and that's the end. An ending that eluded me for years and now it's as familiar to me as my own story. I have no illusion to the fact that it's impossible for me to separate my own feelings from this game because my story with this game is as epic and sprawling as the game itself. It was the perfect game at the perfect time for me. To the point where it kind of honestly ruined other games for me. I tried to go back to playing things like Spider-Man Friend or Foe or one of the Legend of Spyro games and found myself so incredibly bored because for me the bar had been raised. Suddenly I understood what it meant to play a true classic to the point where all other games I played previously which I considered good were no longer that good. Suddenly the freedom of an open world was what I craved. And while I eventually learned to appreciate linear games again, I feel like this game gave me a high that I spent years trying to find. Of course, I managed to find it with games like Just Cause 2, Red Dead Redemption, the Saints Row games, Bully, Infamous 2, certain Assassin's Creed games, and so on. It's been many years, and my appreciation for this game has definitely wavered as I've gotten older, much like a whirlwind love affair turning into a long-term relationship. And while I can fully acknowledge this game for what it is, and acknowledge the fact that it is rather quaint by today's standards, it doesn't change the fact that it had such an impact on the gaming industry, and it doesn't change the impact it had on me. To the point where I do consider it one of my favorite games of all time, even if I know that if I played it right now fresh, it wouldn't have half the impact it had back in the day. Some things are impossible to separate from personal feelings, and that's okay. Remembering all those halcyon days of sitting under your duvet cover, controller in hand while the room is alit only by the flickering glow of a CRT, punctuated by the faint hum that the CRT makes. Maybe something that only applies to me, but I'm sure we all have those deep connections to our favorite games just from the era we played them. Days you can never recapture. Feelings, emotions, magic that we can never recapture, but days that are so unbelievably meaningful. Those are the days you will remember for years to come. It's just a fact of life that these moments are fleeting, but their brevity is part of what makes them so special. It's impossible to know when the good times are, and sure, we all wish we could know that the good times were happening when they were happening, but even just knowing in hindsight is enough. While it's impossible to recapture those raw emotions that I felt the first couple times I played this game, just as it's impossible to recapture the feeling of waking up on Christmas morning as a kid, I've still been able to come back to this game multiple times and re-immerse myself into the world over the years. And now that I've grown up, my appreciation for this game has shifted from being able to appreciate this game for how groundbreaking it is, to appreciating this game for what it means to me. To me, it's the game that changed everything. It was the start of a new day for me. And just as I watched the sun dawn on a new day back on November 8th, 2010, when I 100%ed the game, despite everything, it has been a beautiful day. Thanks for watching.